Three drunk men, one terrified nurse. A diner full of cowards who looked away. But in the corner sat a man who couldn't ignore injustice. A single father with calloused hands and a warrior's past he'd buried deep. What happened in those next 60 seconds would change everything. This is the story of Ethan Ward, the mechanic who became a guardian, and the CEO who saw beneath his humble exterior. Stay until the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The rain didn't just fall that November night, it attacked. Each drop hit the windows of the Starlight 66 diner like 1,000 tiny fists, demanding entry, demanding attention, demanding that someone, anyone, acknowledge the storm's fury. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed their monotonous song, casting everything in that peculiar yellow-green glow that makes truck stops and late-night diners feel like they exist outside of time, suspended in some liminal space between yesterday and tomorrow. Ethan Ward sat in the furthest corner booth, the one with the cracked red vinyl that pinched if you sat wrong, the one where the table wobbled unless you wedged a folded napkin under the short leg. He'd chosen it deliberately. Old habits. Always sit with your back to the wall. Always position yourself where you can see both exits. Always stay aware of every person in the room, catalog their threat level, plan your response. Even now, 3 years after he'd hung up his uniform, the protocols remained, etched into his nervous system like scars on old wood. Across from him, Grace picked at her grilled cheese, her small fingers pulling it apart into careful geometric pieces. She was 7 years old, with her mother's dark curls and her father's serious gray eyes that had seen too much loss for someone so young, though Ethan worked every day to fill them with enough love to balance the absence. "Daddy, why is the rain so angry?" Grace asked, her voice barely audible over the diner's ambient noise, the clatter of dishes, the hiss of the grill, the low murmur of tired conversations. Ethan smiled, reaching across to tap her nose gently. "Rain's not angry, sweetheart. It's just in a hurry, trying to get where it's going, just like everyone else." "Where do you think it's going?" "Wherever gravity takes it, I suppose. Down to the earth, into the rivers, back to the ocean eventually. It's a cycle." Grace considered this, her face scrunching in that particular way it did when she was thinking hard about something. "Like how you said Mommy's not really gone? That she's just somewhere else in the cycle?" Ethan's chest tightened. Even after 2 years, certain moments still hit him like a sucker punch. "Yeah, baby, like that." He glanced at his watch. 9:30. Way past Grace's bedtime, but the storm had caught them on their way back from the science fair in Cedar Rapids, where Grace had won second place for her robot made entirely from salvaged car parts. The trophy, a cheap plastic thing that meant the world to her, sat on the booth seat beside her, carefully positioned so it wouldn't fall. The plan had been to push through, get home to Riverside before the worst of the weather hit, but the rain had other ideas, coming down so hard that visibility dropped to nearly zero. So Ethan had pulled off at exit 66, found the Starlight Diner with its neon sign flickering like a beacon, and decided to wait it out. Give it an hour, maybe 2. Let Grace eat something warm, let the storm exhaust itself. He hadn't planned on the 3 men at the counter. Ethan had clocked them the moment he walked in. Another old habit. 3 males, mid-20s to early 30s, construction worker builds, wearing jeans and work boots caked with mud. The smell of alcohol reached him even from across the diner, that particular sourness that comes from drinking cheap whiskey for hours. Their body language screamed trouble. Loud voices, aggressive posturing, that particular swagger that comes from too much booze and too little sense. The waitress, Janice, according to her name tag, navigated around them with the practiced wariness of someone who'd dealt with drunk assholes before. She kept her smiles professional, her movements efficient, never lingering longer than necessary. But it was the other woman who had Ethan's attention now. She'd come in about 20 minutes after Ethan and Grace, shaking rain from her jacket, thanking Janice quietly when she was shown to a booth. She was maybe 30, with dark skin and her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore scrubs under her jacket, hospital scrubs, the kind with cartoon characters that pediatric nurses often wore. Even exhausted, she moved with the purposeful efficiency of someone used to long shifts and high stakes. Her name tag, which Ethan could just make out from his angle, read, Vanessa, RN. She'd ordered coffee and pie, pulled out her phone, and seemed to be doing exactly what Ethan was doing, waiting out the storm, stealing a moment of peace before heading back into the chaos of her life. The three drunk men had noticed her too. Ethan watched it unfold with the grim inevitability of a car crash in slow motion. The men's conversation had gotten progressively louder, their laughter more aggressive. Then one of them, the tallest, with a scraggly beard and a backwards baseball cap, said something to his friends that made them all turn to look at Vanessa. The energy in the room shifted. Ethan felt it like a physical thing, that particular charge that precedes violence. He'd felt it in Fallujah, in Kandahar, in a dozen forward operating bases whose names he'd tried to forget. It was the moment when possibility collapsed into inevitability, when the situation stopped being something you could talk your way out of. "Daddy, I need to use the bathroom," Grace announced. Ethan's attention snapped back to his daughter. "Okay, baby, you remember where it is? Past the kitchen, second door on the left. That's my girl. Go ahead, I'll be right here." He watched her slide out of the booth, trophy clutched in one hand, and head toward the back of the diner. The moment she disappeared around the corner, his focus returned to the situation developing at the counter. The three men were standing now, moving, heading toward Vanessa's booth. Every other patron in the diner suddenly found their food fascinating. The trucker three booths over studied his meatloaf like it held the secrets of the universe. The elderly couple near the door became intensely interested in their coffee. Even Janice, the waitress, found urgent business in the kitchen. This was the social contract of public spaces. Don't get involved, don't make eye contact, don't become part of someone else's problem. Ethan understood it. Hell, he'd relied on it himself plenty of times. The world was full of situations that weren't your business, problems that weren't yours to solve, but some things you couldn't ignore. The tallest drunk reached Vanessa's booth first, sliding into the seat across from her without invitation. His friends flanked the table, blocking her in. "Hey there, sweetheart," tall guy said, his words slurring together. "You look lonely over here all by yourself." Vanessa's body language shifted immediately, shoulders back, chin up, voice firm. "I'm fine, thanks. I'd like to be left alone." "Aw, don't be like that." This from the second guy, shorter but broader, with a scar across his left eyebrow. "We're just being friendly." "I'm not interested in friendly. Please leave." "Please leave," the third man mimicked in a high-pitched voice, and they all laughed like he'd said the funniest thing in the world. Ethan's hands clenched under the table. "Not your problem," he told himself. "Grace is in the bathroom. Your responsibility is to your daughter, not to every stranger in trouble." But his body was already moving, old training overriding rational thought. He was halfway out of the booth before he consciously decided to stand. Tall guy was leaning across the table now, invading Vanessa's space. "Come on, baby. We're just trying to show you a good time, unless you think you're too good for guys like us. That it?" "I think you're drunk and harassing me, and I'm asking you one more time to leave me alone." Vanessa's voice was steady, but Ethan could see her hands trembling slightly. She was reaching into her bag, probably for her phone. Scarface grabbed her wrist. "Where are you going? We're talking here." That's when Vanessa screamed. It wasn't loud, wasn't theatrical, just a sharp, startled sound of pain and fear. But it cut through the diner's ambient noise like a knife, and suddenly everyone was frozen, caught in that horrible moment of decision, intervene or pretend you didn't notice. Ethan was already moving. He crossed the distance in 4 long strides, his boots barely making sound on the checkered floor. Years of training had taught him how to move fast without broadcasting his intentions, how to close distance before your opponent realized you were a threat. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice calm, conversational, the tone he'd used 1,000 times in 1,000 tense situations. "Time to go." All three men turned to look at him. Ethan used the moment to assess, catalog, plan. Tall guy was the leader, the one the others looked to for cues. Scarface was the enforcer, the one most likely to throw the first punch. The third guy, skinny, nervous energy, hands fidgeting, was the follower, would do whatever the others did but had no initiative of his own. "The fuck are you supposed to be?" tall guy said, standing up from the booth. He had maybe 2 inches on Ethan and 30 pounds. but it was alcohol weight, soft weight. This ain't your business, Pops. Pops. Ethan was 34. I'm making it my business, Ethan said. The lady asked you to leave, so leave. Or what? Scarface stepped forward, chest puffed, trying to use his bulk to intimidate. Ethan didn't move, didn't blink, didn't show any of the things that men like this looked for when they were deciding whether someone was worth the trouble. Instead, he locked eyes with Scarface and spoke in that same calm, almost friendly tone. Or you're going to spend the rest of your night explaining to the police why you thought grabbing a woman's wrist was a good idea. He paused, then added, and probably getting your jaw wired shut, but that's secondary. Behind him, Ethan heard Janice on the phone. Yes, police. Starlight 66 Diner on Route 30. We have a situation. The smart move would have been for the three men to leave. They were drunk, not stupid, or at least not stupid enough to want cops involved. But alcohol has a way of turning minor stupidity into catastrophic decision-making. Tall guy made his choice. You think you're tough? Old man in a fucking jacket thinks he's... He swung. A big looping haymaker that would have worked great in a bar fight against someone who didn't know it was coming. But Ethan knew it was coming before Tall Guy's shoulder even twitched. The human body telegraphs its intentions. The eyes focus on the target. The weight shifts. The shoulder drops slightly before the arm comes around. Ethan had been trained to read these signs, to see the punch before it was thrown, to always be 3 moves ahead. He slipped the punch with minimal movement, just enough to let the fist whistle past his ear, and in the same motion drove his palm into Tall Guy's solar plexus. It was a precise strike, not designed to break ribs but to expel air, to disable without permanent damage. Tall Guy went down like a puppet with cut strings, gasping, unable to catch his breath. Scarface roared and charged, more coordinated than his friend but still telegraphing everything. Ethan sidestepped, used the man's momentum against him, and helped him into a collision with the booth table. The impact made dishes rattle. Scarface slumped, dazed. The third guy, Skinny, looked at his fallen friends, looked at Ethan, and made the smartest decision of his night. He put his hands up. I'm out, man. I'm out. Smart, Ethan said. Now get your friends and wait outside for the cops. The whole thing had taken maybe 15 seconds. The diner was silent except for the rain and Tall Guy's wheezing. Every eye was on Ethan now. He could feel their stares, feel them reassessing him, trying to reconcile the tired-looking mechanic with what they'd just witnessed. Then Grace's voice cut through the quiet. Daddy? Ethan turned to see his daughter standing near the bathroom hallway, trophy still clutched in her small hands, her eyes wide. Not scared. Grace had seen her father handle situations before, knew he was always in control, but confused. It's okay, baby, Ethan said, keeping his voice gentle, normal. Everything's fine. Just some guys who had too much to drink. Come here. Grace walked over and Ethan lifted her up, settling her on his hip like she weighed nothing. She was getting too big for this, but he wasn't ready to admit it yet. Did you hurt them? Grace asked quietly. Nope. Just helped them understand it was time to leave. Vanessa was standing now, freed from the booth, her hands still shaking. She looked at Ethan like she couldn't quite process what had just happened. Thank you. God, thank you. I thought... You're safe now, Ethan said. Police are on their way. You'll want to file a report, press charges. Make sure these guys think twice before trying this again. Skinny was helping Tall Guy to his feet, and Scarface was stumbling upright, touching his head gingerly. The fight had gone out of all of them. They shuffled towards the door like scolded children, knowing the cops were coming, knowing they'd made a mistake. As they pushed through the door into the rain, Tall Guy turned back, face red with humiliation and rage. This ain't over, asshole. Ethan just looked at him, and whatever the man saw in that look made him reconsider. He muttered something under his breath and disappeared into the storm. The diner slowly came back to life. The trucker went back to his meatloaf. The elderly couple resumed their quiet conversation. Janice emerged from the kitchen with a towel, starting to clean up the mess. But there was one person still watching Ethan with an intensity that made the back of his neck prickle with awareness. She sat at the counter, a woman he hadn't noticed before, probably because she'd been sitting so still, so composed, that she'd blended into the background. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a charcoal gray suit that looked expensive even to Ethan's untrained eye. A laptop sat open in front of her, and a cup of coffee, now probably cold, sat untouched beside it. But it was her eyes that caught Ethan's attention. Dark, intelligent eyes that were studying him with the kind of focus usually reserved for complex problems requiring solutions. Amelia Hart had stopped in the Starlight 66 for the same reason everyone else had: the storm. She'd been driving back to Chicago from a site visit at her company's manufacturing facility in Iowa City, had seen the weather turning nasty, and had decided to wait it out somewhere with decent coffee and Wi-Fi. She'd been reviewing quarterly projections when the situation had developed, had watched it unfold with the same detached awareness with which she watched most things, cataloging, analyzing, filing away for future reference. But what she'd just witnessed had snapped her out of spreadsheet mode and into something else entirely. Amelia had grown up around military men. Her father had been Army, her uncle Marines. She knew what training looked like, knew the difference between a lucky bar fighter and someone who'd been professionally taught how to disable threats. The man who'd just neutralized 3 attackers in under 15 seconds wasn't lucky. He was skilled, extremely skilled, and he was holding a 7-year-old girl like she was the most precious thing in the world. The dissonance fascinated her. "Ma'am, you okay?" Janice asked, touching Ethan's shoulder. "That was... I can't even... Thank you. Nobody ever..." She seemed unable to finish any sentence. "I'm fine," Ethan said. "How long until the police arrive?" "They said 10, maybe 15 minutes. Storm's got everything backed up." Ethan nodded, then turned to Vanessa, who was gathering her things with shaking hands. "You should sit down. Adrenaline dump is going to hit you in a minute. Trust me." "I'm a nurse," Vanessa said, trying for humor but her voice wavering. "I know about adrenaline." "Then you know I'm right." She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound, and sat back down. "I don't even know your name." "Ethan Ward." "I'm Vanessa Chen." She looked at Grace. "And who's this brave girl?" "I'm Grace," said Grace, with all the seriousness of a child introduced to a stranger. "I won 2nd place in the science fair." "Did you now? What did you make?" "A robot that sorts different types of metal. For recycling. Daddy helped with the welding, but I did all the programming myself." Vanessa smiled, some of the fear leaving her face. "A young engineer. The world needs more of those." Ethan set Grace down gently. "Baby, can you go grab your trophy? We'll need to get our stuff together for when the police get here." Grace nodded and scampered back to their booth. Ethan lowered his voice, speaking just to Vanessa. "Are you hurt? He grabbed you pretty hard." Vanessa rotated her wrist experimentally. "Bruise tomorrow, probably. Nothing serious. I've had worse from patients." She met his eyes. "You saved me from..." "I don't even want to think about where that was going. How can I thank you?" "You don't need to thank me. You just need to file that police report. Men like that, they do this over and over until someone stops them. You stop them." "I will." She paused. "Where did you learn to do that? Fight like that?" "Marine Corps. Long time ago." "You're either very good or very lucky." "I'm very out of practice," Ethan said, and there was something sad in his voice that Vanessa caught but didn't push. The police arrived 12 minutes later. 2 officers in rain-soaked uniforms who took statements, photographed Vanessa's wrist, and went back out into the storm to find the 3 men, who apparently hadn't made it far before sitting down on the curb to drunkenly contemplate their life choices. Ethan kept his statement brief, factual, emotionless. Yes, he'd intervened. No, he hadn't thrown any punches. Yes, the men had been the aggressors. No, he didn't want to press any charges himself. He just wanted to finish his coffee and get his daughter home. The senior officer, a gray-haired man with Morrison on his name tape, studied Ethan with the knowing eyes of someone who'd seen his share of violence. "You military?" "Was. Marines. Infantry." Morrison nodded like this explained everything. "We'll need you to come by the station tomorrow, sign a formal statement. But between you and me, you probably saved that nurse from something pretty bad tonight. These guys have a history. Bar fights, DUIs, one assault charge that got pleaded down. You did good. I just did what needed doing. More than anyone else here did," Morrison said, glancing meaningfully at the other patrons who suddenly found their plates fascinating again. After the police left, after Vanessa had been given a ride home by Officer Morrison's partner, after the diner had resumed its late-night rhythm, Ethan returned to his booth where Grace was drowsing against the window, her trophy held like a teddy bear. "Time to go, baby," he said softly. "Is the rain still angry?" Ethan glanced outside. The storm had diminished to a steady downpour, still heavy but drivable. "It's tired out, I think. Just like you." He gathered their things, left a 20 on the table for Janice, way more than the meal cost, but after the night she'd had, she deserved it, and lifted Grace into his arms. She was asleep before they reached the door. "Mr. Ward?" The voice came from behind him. He turned to find the woman in the gray suit standing, laptop closed, coffee abandoned. Up close she was striking, not beautiful in the conventional sense, but possessed of the kind of presence that demanded attention. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that missed nothing, the bearing of someone used to being the most competent person in any room. "That's me," Ethan said. "I'm Amelia Hart." She extended a hand and Ethan shook it, careful not to disturb Grace. Her grip was firm, confident. "I wanted to thank you for what you did tonight. That situation could have gone very badly." "You're welcome," Ethan said, preparing to leave, already mentally calculating drive time, getting Grace into bed, whether he had time to make her lunch for school tomorrow. "You moved like someone with serious training," Amelia said. "Not just basic military, something specialized." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "You know military training?" "My father was Army, Ranger. I grew up around soldiers." She paused. "But I've never seen anyone move quite like you did. That level of control, that precision, that's not standard infantry." "It was a long time ago," Ethan said, deflecting. "And I'm out of practice." "You didn't look out of practice." Amelia reached into her jacket and pulled out a business card. "I run a security company in Chicago, Hart Industries. We specialize in corporate protection, facility security, threat assessment. I'm always looking for people with your particular skill set." Ethan glanced at the card. Embossed letters, heavy stock, CEO and founder. "I fix cars, Ms. Hart. I'm not interested in corporate security." "Can I ask why not?" "Because I'm tired," Ethan thought. "Because I've seen enough violence to last 10 lifetimes. Because every time I close my eyes, I still see Fallujah burning, still hear the screams, still smell the copper penny stink of blood mixing with desert sand. Because I have a daughter who needs a father who comes home every night, not a father who gets called away to places where people die." What he said was, "I like fixing things that stay fixed." Amelia smiled slightly, a knowing expression. "I understand, but if you ever change your mind, my number's on the card." She glanced at Grace, sleeping peacefully against her father's shoulder. "You're a good man, Mr. Ward. Your daughter's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have her," Ethan corrected. He pushed through the door into the rain, leaving Amelia Hart standing in the diner's fluorescent glow, turning his words over in her mind like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit the picture she'd constructed. Outside, the storm had settled into a steady rhythm, the kind of rain that soaks everything but doesn't destroy. Ethan strapped Grace into her car seat, tucked her trophy safely beside her, and started the old Ford pickup that had been his companion for the past 3 years. As he pulled out of the parking lot, his headlights swept across the diner's windows one last time. He could see Amelia Hart still standing there, watching him leave, phone pressed to her ear, already talking to someone with that same intense focus he'd seen earlier. He pushed the image from his mind. People like her, successful, driven, existing in a world of quarterly profits and corporate strategies, didn't overlap with people like him. He fixed transmissions and alternators, made breakfast, helped with science fair projects, and tried to fill the hole that Sarah's death had left in Grace's life. That was his world now. That was enough. It had to be enough. The drive back to Riverside took 45 minutes through the rain. By the time Ethan pulled into the driveway of the small house on Maple Street, the house that always felt too empty, too quiet, too full of memories, Grace was deep asleep, drooling slightly on her car seat strap. He carried her inside, careful not to wake her, and tucked her into bed, still in her clothes. He'd pay for that tomorrow when she complained about sleeping in jeans, but tonight he just didn't have the energy for pajamas and teeth brushing. He placed the science fair trophy on her nightstand, where she'd see it first thing in the morning. Then he stood in the doorway of her room, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, feeling that peculiar combination of love and terror that parenting brought. Everything he did was for her. Every decision, every choice, every moment of every day was filtered through the lens of what's best for Grace. And what was best for Grace was stability, safety, a father who was present and available, not chasing danger for a paycheck. So no, Mrs. Amelia Hart, with her expensive suit and her security company, he wouldn't be calling her number. He wouldn't be going back to that life, to rooms full of threats and decisions made in split seconds and the weight of other people's lives in his hands. He'd done his time. He'd paid his dues. He'd earned the right to a quiet life. Or so he told himself as he finally went to his own room, stripped off the old Marine jacket, the one with the faded insignia and the stains that wouldn't come out no matter how many times he washed it, and lay down in the bed that had been too big for one person for 2 years now. Sleep, when it came, brought the usual dreams, the ones he never talked about, the ones that reminded him that some things you carry forever, no matter how far you run from them. In Chicago, 90 miles away, Amelia Hart sat in her downtown office despite the late hour, staring at the business card she'd given to Ethan Ward. She'd handed out hundreds of such cards over the years, to potential clients, to job candidates, to people she wanted to remember her. But she had a feeling about this one, a feeling that the tired mechanic with the careful eyes and the sleeping daughter represented something her company needed, even if she couldn't quite articulate what that something was. Security isn't just about preventing threats, her father used to say. It's about understanding the value of what you're protecting. Ethan Ward understood value. She'd seen it in the way he held his daughter, in the way he'd stood between Vanessa Chen and those 3 drunks without hesitation, in the way he'd deflected praise and attention afterward. He understood what mattered. Amelia pulled up her company's organizational chart on her laptop, studying the security division. Good people, competent people, but nobody with Ethan's particular combination of skills and character. Nobody who moved like him, thought like him, carried themselves like him. She made a note in her calendar. Follow up on Ethan Ward. Then she closed her laptop and headed home through the rain, already planning her next move, because Amelia Hart hadn't built a multi-million-dollar company by giving up when people said no. She'd built it by understanding what they needed better than they understood it themselves, and then showing them why yes was the only logical answer. Ethan Ward didn't know it yet, but their story was just beginning. The rain continued through the night, washing the streets clean, filling the gutters, feeding the rivers that would eventually carry it back to the ocean. Everything in cycles, just like Ethan had told Grace, everything coming back around, everything connected in ways we don't see until we look back and trace the paths that brought us to where we are. And sometimes, on nights like this, in moments like that one in the Starlight 66 diner, paths cross that were never meant to be separate. Lives collide that were always meant to intersect. Stories begin that were waiting to be told. In Riverside, Ethan Ward slept fitfully, dreaming of storms and battles. In Chicago, Amelia Hart planned her next approach, thinking of solutions and strategies. And in between, on Route 30, the Starlight 66 diner stayed open through the rain, a beacon for travelers, a waypoint for stories, a place where strangers became heroes and heroes became something more. The night wore on. The storm eventually passed, and tomorrow, as always, would bring new challenges, new decisions, new moments where people had to choose between looking away and stepping forward. But that was tomorrow's story. Tonight's story ended with a sleeping child, a watchful father, and a business card sitting on a kitchen counter, waiting to see if it would be thrown away or kept, waiting to see which path would be chosen, waiting, like everything else, for morning to reveal what the darkness had set in motion. Morning arrived with the particular clarity that follows storms, the kind of light that makes everything look freshly painted, edges sharper, colors more vivid. Ethan woke at 5:30, the way he always did, internal clock calibrated by years of military discipline that civilian life hadn't managed to reset. Grace was still asleep when he checked on her, sprawled across her bed in yesterday's clothes, one arm flung over the side, her science fair trophy gleaming in the early sunlight streaming through her window. He stood there for a moment, drinking in the sight of her peaceful face, reminding himself why everything else, the nightmares, the memories, The constant low-grade anxiety was worth it. The kitchen was cold when he padded downstairs in bare feet. The business card sat exactly where he'd left it the night before, next to the coffee maker, Amelia Hart's name embossed in elegant letters that seemed to mock the modest surroundings of his small kitchen with its chipped formica counters and the refrigerator that hummed too loud. He picked up the card, studying it in the morning light. Hart Industries, Corporate Security Solutions, a Chicago address in what he knew was an expensive part of downtown, a phone number, an email address, an invitation to a life he'd deliberately left behind. Ethan opened the drawer where he kept the junk mail, the expired coupons, the various detritus of daily life. The card hovered over the opening for a moment, ready to be buried and forgotten. Instead, he found himself tucking it into his wallet, just in case, he told himself. Not because he was interested, just because throwing away someone's business card felt rude, and the woman had been kind to Grace, had recognized something in him that most people missed. The coffee pot gurgled to life, filling the kitchen with that dark, bitter smell that was the only thing keeping him functional most mornings. He made Grace's lunch, peanut butter and jelly, apple slices, the cookies shaped like dinosaurs that she loved, and was starting on eggs when he heard her footsteps on the stairs. "Daddy, why did you let me sleep in my clothes?" Grace appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair sticking up in 17 directions, a crease from her pillow printed on her left cheek. "Because you were tired, and I'm a terrible father who prioritizes sleep over proper bedtime routines." Grace giggled, climbing onto her chair at the small kitchen table. "You're not terrible. You're the best daddy. Even when I let you sleep in jeans." Even then, she spotted her lunch bag on the counter, already packed. "Can I have extra cookies today? I want to share with Emma. She liked my robot, and I want to be nice." "2 extras," Ethan said, adding them to the bag. "But you have to eat all your sandwich first." "Deal." They fell into their morning rhythm, eggs and toast, Grace chattering about her plans to improve the robot for next year's fair, Ethan half listening and half thinking about the transmission job waiting for him at the shop. By 7:15, they were in the truck. By 7:30, Grace was deposited at Riverside Elementary with a kiss on the forehead and a reminder to be brave and kind. Ward's Auto Repair wasn't much to look at from the outside. A cinder-block building painted an unfortunate shade of olive green, with a hand-painted sign that Ethan kept meaning to replace and never quite got around to. But inside, the shop was his domain, organized with the same precision he'd once applied to weapons maintenance and tactical planning. 3 bays, 2 lifts, every tool in its designated place. The smell of motor oil and metal, and that indefinable scent of mechanical work that had become as familiar to him as his own breathing. This was where Ethan felt most at peace, in the clean logic of engines and transmissions, problems that had solutions, things that could be fixed with the right tools and enough patience. His partner, Miguel Rodriguez, was already there when Ethan arrived, bent over the engine of a Honda Civic, reggaeton playing softly from a Bluetooth speaker balanced on the workbench. "Morning, boss," Miguel said without looking up. He was younger than Ethan by almost a decade, built like a boxer, with tattooed sleeves that told the story of a life that had found its direction later than most. They'd met 3 years ago when Miguel had been fresh out of a vocational program, looking for someone willing to take a chance on a guy with a record. Ethan had seen past the mistakes to the skill underneath, and Miguel had repaid that faith with loyalty and work ethic that put most people to shame. "Morning? That the Civic with the check engine light?" "Yeah, O2 sensor, like we thought. Be done by noon." Ethan grabbed his coveralls from the hook by the door, the fabric worn soft from countless washings. "I've got the Silverado transmission first thing. Mrs. Patterson's been without her truck for a week already." "She called again yesterday?" 3 times. Miguel laughed. "That woman loves you, man. She wants you to fix more than her transmission. You know what I'm saying? She's 74 and happily married. She's lonely and you're nice to her. I'm telling you, you got an admirer." Ethan just shook his head, smiling despite himself, and headed to Bay 3 where the Silverado waited. Work was good. Work was simple. Work didn't ask complicated questions or dredge up complicated feelings. You diagnosed the problem, you fixed the problem, you moved on to the next one. The morning passed in a blur of bolts and hydraulic fluid, the precise choreography of disassembly and repair that Ethan could do half asleep. By 11, he had the transmission out and opened on the workbench, identifying the worn synchronizers that were causing the grinding Mrs. Patterson had complained about. He was elbow deep in gears when the sound of expensive heels on concrete made him look up. Amelia Hart stood in the entrance to Bay 3, looking almost comically out of place in her tailored black pantsuit and silk blouse. She'd traded last night's gray for charcoal, but the effect was the same. Money, power, someone used to boardrooms and quarterly reports, not auto shops that smelled like brake cleaner and old coffee. "Mr. Ward," she said, and there was something in her voice, not quite amusement, not quite challenge, that made Ethan suddenly very aware of the grease on his hands and the oil stains on his coveralls. "Ms. Hart." He straightened, wiping his hands on a shop rag that only succeeded in spreading the grease around. "This is unexpected. I was in the neighborhood. Chicago's 90 miles from here. I have excellent navigation." She took a few steps into the bay, her eyes scanning the space with that same intense focus he'd seen last night, taking in the organized chaos, the tools arranged with military precision, the attention to detail that most people wouldn't notice but that spoke volumes to someone who knew what to look for. "Actually, I had a meeting in Iowa City this morning. Thought I'd stop by on my way back." "Your transmission problems acting up again?" A small smile played at the corner of her mouth. "You know I don't have transmission problems." "I suspected." Miguel appeared in the doorway, took one look at Amelia, and raised his eyebrows at Ethan in a gesture that clearly said, "Who is this and why is she here?" Ethan gave him a subtle head shake that meant, "Not now." "Is there something I can do for you, Ms. Hart?" Ethan asked, keeping his tone professional, already knowing where this was going and already preparing his polite decline. "I want to hire you. I'm a mechanic." "You're much more than a mechanic, and we both know it." She pulled out her phone, tapped something, and turned the screen toward him. It showed what looked like security camera footage from the diner, grainy but clear enough to show Ethan's intervention, the precise economy of his movements. "I've watched this about a dozen times since last night. That's not self-defense training from a weekend class. That's professional, specialized, probably classified training." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Where did you get that footage?" "I asked the diner owner. Told her I wanted it for insurance purposes related to the incident." "That's borderline illegal." "That's resourcefulness." She pocketed the phone. "Force reconnaissance, right? That's my guess. Maybe raiders, something special operations." "I told you last night, you fix cars and you have a daughter and you're out of practice. I remember." Amelia took another step closer, and Ethan noticed she'd chosen flats today instead of heels, probably anticipating the concrete floor of an auto shop. "Details." This woman paid attention to details. "But I also remember watching you assess 3 threats in under a second, neutralize them with minimal force, and then immediately shift back to dad mode without missing a beat. That's not training you forget, Mr. Ward. That's training that becomes part of who you are." "What exactly are you proposing?" "Consultation work. Nothing dangerous, nothing that takes you away from your daughter. I need someone to assess our corporate security, facilities, protocols, potential vulnerabilities. Someone who thinks like you think, who sees things that normal security consultants miss." She named a figure for a single day's work that made Ethan blink. That was more than he made in a good week at the shop. "That's too much money for walking around your building and pointing out problems. That's market rate for someone with your expertise." She paused, reading something in his expression. "You don't trust money. You think if someone's offering that much, there must be a catch. There's always a catch. The catch is that I'm very good at recognizing talent, and I don't like wasting it. You're working on transmissions when you could be doing something that actually challenges you." Ethan felt a flash of irritation. "You don't know anything about what challenges me." "Don't I?" Amelia's voice softened slightly. "I saw your face last night when those men wouldn't back down. You didn't want to fight them. You wanted to be invisible, wanted the situation to resolve itself so you could finish your coffee and go home. But you couldn't walk away because that's not who you are. You're someone who steps up when no one else will, even though every time you do it, it costs you something." The accuracy of the assessment stung more than Ethan wanted to admit. "That's supposed to convince me to work for you?" "It's supposed to make you understand that I see you. Not the mechanic pretending he's just a mechanic. You. The man who's running from something but can't quite outrun his own nature. They stood there in the bay, morning sunlight streaming through the open door, the Silverado's transmission in pieces between them like evidence at a crime scene. Miguel had wisely disappeared, probably to give them privacy or possibly to eavesdrop from a more discreet location. "One day," Amelia said. "Come to Chicago for one day. Let me show you what I'm building, what we're trying to do. If after that you still want to spend your life changing oil and fixing transmissions, I'll never bother you again. But if I'm right, if there's a part of you that's been dying of boredom for the last 3 years, then maybe we can work out an arrangement that benefits both of us. I have responsibilities." "Bring your daughter." Ethan's head snapped up. "What?" "You're a single father. I get it. The schedule has to work around her, so bring her. I've got a facility tour scheduled for Friday afternoon, boring stuff, walking through our manufacturing floor, looking at new security installations, but I also have a robotics division that I think a second-place science fair winner might find interesting. You're using my daughter to manipulate me into taking this job. I'm offering to show your daughter something amazing while simultaneously addressing your legitimate concerns about childcare. If that's manipulation, then call me guilty." Amelia pulled out another business card, this one with a handwritten note on the back. "Friday, 2 o'clock. The address is on the card. If you come, excellent. If you don't, I'll know I misjudged you." She handed him the card and turned to leave, her footsteps echoing on the concrete. Then she paused at the entrance to the bay, looking back over her shoulder. "For what it's worth, Mr. Ward, I don't think you're running from the violence. I think you're running from the version of yourself who was good at it. But being good at something doesn't make you bad. It just makes you capable. And the world needs capable people." Then she was gone, the sound of an expensive car engine starting up, pulling away, leaving Ethan standing in his shop with grease on his hands and too many thoughts crowding his head. Miguel reappeared instantly, confirming that he had indeed been eavesdropping. "Bro, who was that?" "A problem. That was not a problem. That was an opportunity wearing very expensive clothes." Ethan turned back to the transmission, picking up a wrench, trying to lose himself in the mechanical simplicity of the work. But his mind kept circling back to Amelia's words, to the footage she'd shown him, to the amount of money she'd offered for a single day's work. One day. What harm could one day do? The rest of the week passed in the ordinary rhythm of Ethan's life. Work, school pickup, dinner, homework, bedtime stories, repeat. Grace was still riding high on her science fair success, talking endlessly about improvements she wanted to make, asking Ethan questions about circuits and programming that he answered as best he could, grateful for YouTube tutorials when his knowledge hit its limits. Wednesday evening, while Grace was absorbed in building something from Lego bricks, Ethan found himself looking at Amelia's card again. The address was in the West Loop, an area he knew had undergone massive redevelopment in recent years. The handwritten note on the back said simply, "You won't regret this." A. Thursday morning, while Grace ate her cereal, Ethan made a decision. "Hey kiddo, how would you feel about taking a field trip tomorrow?" Grace looked up, milk dribbling down her chin. "Like a school field trip?" "Like a Just Us field trip. To Chicago. There's a company that makes robots, real, advanced robots, and they've offered to give us a tour." Her eyes went wide. "Real robots, not toys?" "Industrial robots, manufacturing robots, the kind that build cars and assemble electronics." "Can I bring my notebook?" Ethan smiled. "You can bring your notebook." Friday arrived cold and clear, the kind of November day that promised winter was coming but hadn't quite arrived yet. Ethan called Miguel and told him he was taking a personal day, endured the knowing laughter and suggestions to wear something nice for the pretty lady, and then drove Grace to Chicago with her pressed against the window the entire way, watching the landscape change from rural Iowa to suburban sprawl to the towering verticality of the city itself. Hart Industries occupied a converted warehouse building in the West Loop, all exposed brick and enormous windows, the kind of industrial chic architecture that screamed money and taste. The lobby was minimalist elegance, polished concrete floors, steel beams, carefully curated art pieces that probably cost more than Ethan's truck. The receptionist, A young man with perfectly styled hair and a headset that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie smiled as they approached. "Mr. Ward? That's me? Ms. Hart is expecting you. 5th floor, elevators to your right. She said to send you straight up." The elevator was glass, offering views of the building's interior as they rose. Open office plans, people clustered around standing desks, the hum of productivity visible even from a distance. Grace pressed her face against the glass, fascinated by everything. "Daddy, this place is so cool." "It is pretty impressive," Ethan admitted. The 5th floor opened directly into a reception area where Amelia stood waiting, and Ethan was momentarily thrown by the transformation. Gone was the severe business suit, replaced by dark jeans and a simple black sweater, her hair down instead of pinned back. She looked younger, more approachable, though her eyes still held that same sharp intelligence. "Mr. Ward, and this must be Grace." She crouched down to Grace's eye level, a gesture Ethan appreciated. "I heard you won 2nd place at your science fair. What did you build?" "A sorting robot that separates different metals for recycling," Grace said, suddenly shy in the face of this striking stranger. "It uses magnets and weight sensors." "That's brilliant. You know, we have robots here that do something similar, but for manufacturing components. Would you like to see them?" Grace looked up at Ethan, seeking permission. He nodded, and her shyness evaporated. "Yes, please." Amelia straightened, meeting Ethan's eyes. "Thank you for coming. I know you're skeptical, but I think you'll find this interesting." The tour started in what Amelia called the Innovation Lab, a space filled with workbenches, 3D printers, and several robots in various stages of assembly. A young woman with purple-streaked hair and safety goggles perched on her head looked up as they entered. "Sarah, this is Grace. She builds robots. I thought maybe you could show her what you're working on while I steal her father for a bit." Sarah's face lit up. "Oh, absolutely. Come here. Let me show you our adaptive gripper prototype. It can handle anything from eggs to engine blocks without breaking them." Grace was instantly absorbed, and Ethan felt a moment of anxiety watching his daughter get pulled into conversation with a stranger. But Sarah had an easy way with her, speaking to Grace like an equal rather than a child, and within minutes they were deep in discussion about servo motors and pressure sensors. "She'll be fine," Amelia said quietly. "Sarah's one of our best engineers, and she volunteers teaching robotics to middle schoolers. Grace couldn't be in better hands." "This feels like a setup. This is good planning. Come on, I want to show you something." Amelia led him through the building, and despite his resistance, Ethan found himself impressed. This wasn't some corporate monolith focused purely on profits. There was creativity here, innovation, people who genuinely seemed to care about their work. The manufacturing floor, where robots did indeed assemble components with balletic precision, was clean, well-organized, and most importantly, safe. The security protocols were visible everywhere, from badge-controlled doors to carefully positioned cameras to emergency procedures posted at every exit. But as Amelia walked him through the facility, Ethan's trained eye caught the flaws. "Your loading dock has a blind spot," he said, pointing to a corner where the camera angle missed a crucial area. "Someone could bring in unauthorized materials there." Amelia made a note on her tablet. "Good catch. What else?" "Your badge system. Does it track badge sharing? Because I saw 2 people come through that door on one badge swipe." "It logs the swipe, but doesn't track dual entry." "It should. That's a major vulnerability." Ethan paused, studying the layout. "And your emergency protocols, they're posted, which is good, but they're all identical. If someone wanted to cause chaos, they could create a false emergency and everyone would bottleneck at the same exits. You need differentiated protocols for different zones." They spent the next hour walking through the facility, Ethan pointing out vulnerabilities that Amelia's existing security team had missed, offering solutions that were practical rather than expensive. Thinking through scenarios with the kind of tactical mindset that came from years of training. He didn't realize how much he'd been engaged until they were back on the 5th floor, and he looked at his watch to find that 90 minutes had passed. Grace and Sarah were still deep in conversation, now building something together with an assortment of components spread across the workbench. "So," Amelia said, settling into a chair in her office and gesturing for Ethan to do the same. What do you think? I think you've built something good here. The people seem happy, the work seems meaningful. That's rare. But I'm still a mechanic with a daughter to raise and a life that doesn't include corporate security consulting. Amelia leaned forward, elbows on her desk. What if it could? What if I'm not asking you to change your life, just to expand it slightly? I'm listening. 1 day a month. You come here, you do exactly what you did today. Walk through, identify problems, offer solutions. I pay you that consulting rate I mentioned. You're home for dinner. Grace thinks you're the coolest dad because he works with robots sometimes. And you get to use those skills that are currently being wasted on oil changes. 1 day a month. That's it. And if at any point it doesn't work for you, you walk away. No contract, no hard feelings. I'm betting that you'll find it satisfying enough to keep coming back. But if I'm wrong, you lose nothing but a few days. Ethan wanted to say no. Every instinct told him to say no, to walk away from this woman and her offers and her too sharp insights into who he really was. But there was another part of him, the part that had been slowly dying over the past 3 years, the part that still woke up sometimes feeling like he was supposed to be doing something more, that was quietly, insistently saying yes. Can I ask you something? He said. Why me? You could hire any number of security consultants with better credentials and fewer complications. Because credentials can be faked and complications are what make people interesting. Amelia stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city. My father taught me to trust my instincts about people. When I saw you in that diner, I saw someone who didn't just react. You thought, you calculated, you solved a complex problem in real time with minimal collateral damage. That's not just training, Mr. Ward. That's character. And character is what I'm looking for. Through the glass wall of Amelia's office, Ethan could see Grace showing Sarah something in her notebook, both of them laughing about something. His daughter was happy, engaged, learning. Wasn't that worth something? Wasn't showing her that her father could be more than just a mechanic worth the minor risk of saying yes? Okay, he heard himself say. 1 day a month. Trial basis. First sign it's not working. You walk away. I know. Deal. Amelia extended her hand, and when Ethan shook it, he felt like he'd just crossed some invisible threshold, stepped over a line he'd been carefully staying behind for 3 years. They collected Grace, who chattered nonstop about the robots and the circuits, and Sarah's promise to email her some programming tutorials. On the drive home, as the city receded behind them and the landscape opened up into familiar territory, Ethan found himself thinking about Amelia's words. Maybe she was right. Maybe he'd been running not from the violence, but from the version of himself who'd been good at it, who'd found purpose in solving complex problems under pressure, who'd thrived in situations where most people froze. Dad? Grace's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Yeah, baby. That lady, Ms. Hart, she's really nice and smart. I like her. She is smart. Are you going to work with her? Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting his daughter's eyes. Maybe. Sometimes. We'll see. I think you should. You seemed happy today, like different happy than fixing cars happy. Out of the mouths of children, Ethan thought. 7 years old, and she could already read him better than most adults. I'll think about it, he said, even though the decision was already made. That night, after Grace was asleep and the house had settled into its usual quiet, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a beer he wasn't really drinking and Amelia's business card in his hand. The handwritten note stared back at him. You won't regret this. He hoped she was right. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thank you for today. Grace is wonderful. See you next month. Amelia Ethan stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. See you next month. 3 words. A commitment. A step back toward the person he'd been trying to leave behind, or maybe a step toward someone new entirely. Outside, the November wind picked up, rattling the windows, promising colder days ahead. But inside, in his small house on Maple Street, Ethan Ward felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt possibility. The months that followed developed their own rhythm, a careful dance between Ethan's carefully constructed world and the one Amelia was inviting him to join. Every 3rd Friday, he made the drive to Chicago, Grace strapped in beside him with her ever-present notebook, both of them falling into the routine like it had always been part of their lives. December brought his second consultation, where Ethan identified weaknesses in Hart Industries' visitor management system and suggested a complete overhaul that would track not just who came in, but their patterns, their behaviors, anything that deviated from normal. Amelia had listened with that intense focus of hers, occasionally interjecting with questions that proved she wasn't just nodding along, but truly understanding the implications of what he was saying. January found him reviewing their cybersecurity protocols, pointing out that physical security meant nothing if someone could hack their systems from a coffee shop across the street. By February, Amelia had implemented every one of his suggestions, and the difference was visible. Her employees felt safer. Her clients noticed the improvements. Her board of directors started asking where she'd found this consultant who seemed to see threats nobody else could identify. But it was the small moments that mattered most, the ones that happened in the margins of the professional relationship they'd established. The way Amelia always had hot chocolate waiting for Grace, the fancy kind with real whipped cream and a sprinkle of cinnamon. The way she'd started asking Ethan's opinion on things that had nothing to do with security, personnel decisions, office layout, whether the company should expand into new markets. The way she sometimes looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention, an expression that was part curiosity, part something else he couldn't quite name. And then there was the evening in late February when everything shifted. Ethan had just finished his walkthrough of the new facility Hart Industries was opening in the suburbs, a smaller operation focused on research and development. It was nearly 7, later than he'd planned, and Grace had fallen asleep on the couch in Amelia's office, curled up with a robotics textbook that Sarah had loaned her. "She's out cold," Amelia said softly, looking at the sleeping child with the expression Ethan had learned to recognize as genuine affection. "Long day for her?" "Long day for all of us." Ethan rubbed his eyes, feeling the exhaustion that came from hours of concentrated assessment. "Your new facility's solid, by the way. Few minor adjustments needed, but whoever designed the security layout knew what they were doing. That's because I sent them your recommendations from our main building and told them to incorporate everything." Amelia moved to her desk, pulling out a folder. "I wanted to show you something before you left." The folder contained incident reports from the past 3 months, detailed accounts of potential security breaches that had been identified and stopped before they became actual problems. Each one referenced protocols that Ethan had designed, vulnerabilities he'd spotted, solutions he'd proposed. "You prevented all of these," Amelia said. "That attempted industrial espionage in December? Your visitor tracking system caught it. The employee who was planning to steal component designs in January? Your behavior pattern monitoring flagged him. The phishing attempt last week? Your cybersecurity training made our people smart enough to recognize it." Ethan flipped through the reports, something uncomfortable twisting in his chest. "I just pointed out the problems. Your team solved them." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Minimize what you've accomplished here." Amelia's voice was firm but not unkind. "You've transformed our entire security infrastructure in 5 months. You've made this company safer, made our people safer. That matters, Ethan. You matter." The use of his first name caught him off guard. They'd maintained a careful professional distance, Mr. Ward and Ms. Hart, a formality that kept everything neatly categorized and controlled. But something in her voice now, in the way she was looking at him, suggested that the categories were starting to blur. "I'm just doing the job you hired me for," he said quietly. "No, you're doing so much more than that." She closed the folder, set it aside. "Last month, one of our engineers approached me. Said she'd been having problems with a stalker ex-boyfriend, was scared he might show up at work. Within 24 hours of telling our security team, they had a plan. Extra cameras near her workstation, a panic button on her phone that directly contacts security, protocols for what to do if he appeared. She told me she felt safe for the first time in months." "That's good police work by your security team. That's your influence. Before you started consulting with us, security was about protecting the company's assets. Now it's about protecting the people. You changed the culture." Amelia paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I want to offer you something more permanent." Ethan's defenses went up immediately. "We had a deal, 1 day a month, no strings. Hear me out. I'm not asking you to leave your shop or uproot your life, but what you're doing here, it's too valuable to limit to 1 day a month. I want to offer you a position as Director of Security Operations. with the understanding that you work remotely most of the time, come to Chicago when necessary, and maintain complete control over your schedule. Amelia, the salary would be substantial, enough that you wouldn't need to worry about making ends meet, enough that you could hire help for your shop, maybe even expand it if you wanted. Health insurance for you and Grace, education benefits, security clearance that would let you consult with other companies under Hart Industries' umbrella. She named a figure that made Ethan's breath catch. That was life-changing money. That was pay off the mortgage and have Grace's college covered money. Why? He asked. Why are you pushing this so hard? Amelia was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice held a vulnerability he'd never heard before. Because I've spent the last 5 months watching you transform this company, and I've realized something. You're not just good at identifying security problems. You're good at understanding what people need to feel safe, to do their best work, to thrive. That's rare. That's valuable. And selfishly, I don't want to lose it. There are other consultants. I don't want other consultants. I want you. The words hung in the air between them, carrying weight that had nothing to do with security protocols or corporate restructuring. Ethan felt something shift, some carefully maintained boundary beginning to crack. On the couch, Grace stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about servo motors, and the moment broke. I need to get her home, Ethan said, grateful for the excuse to retreat, to put distance between himself and whatever was happening here. Can I think about your offer? Of course, take all the time you need. Amelia's professional mask slipped back into place, but Ethan caught the flash of disappointment in her eyes. Drive safe. He gathered Grace up carefully, her head lolling against his shoulder, grabbed her notebook and backpack, and made his escape. The entire drive home, his mind spun through possibilities and complications, through the careful life he'd built and the one Amelia was offering. It was past Grace's bedtime when they finally pulled into the driveway. He carried her inside, tucked her into bed, still in her clothes, for the second time since this had all started, and then stood in his kitchen staring at nothing, trying to figure out what he wanted. His phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa Chen, the nurse from the diner, someone who'd become an unexpected friend over the past months. Vanessa. Coffee tomorrow? Need advice about this guy I'm seeing. Ethan smiled despite his confusion. He and Vanessa had stayed in touch after that night, bonding over the shared experience and the police reports and the trial where all 3 men had been sentenced to community service and anger management classes. She'd become a steady presence in his life, someone who understood what it meant to be saved by a stranger and who'd made it her mission to make sure that stranger didn't disappear back into isolation. Ethan. Sure. Morning brew at 10? Vanessa. Perfect. Fair warning, I'm buying and I expect full emotional support. The next morning, after dropping Grace at a birthday party that would keep her occupied for hours, Ethan met Vanessa at the coffee shop that had become their unofficial meeting spot. She was already there, 2 large coffees and a plate of croissants on the table, wearing scrubs that suggested she was between shifts. You look tired, she said by way of greeting. You look like you haven't slept in days. Double shift. We had a pile up on the interstate, 17 patients in 4 hours. She pushed one of the coffees toward him. But we're not talking about my work. We're talking about your weird inability to accept good things when they're offered to you. I never said, you didn't have to. I can read you by now, Ethan. Something happened and you're spiraling, so spill. He told her about Amelia's offer, about the salary and the position, and the opportunity to do something that actually mattered. Vanessa listened without interrupting, a skill honed by years of letting patients talk through their fears. Okay, I'm confused, she said when he finished. This sounds amazing. What's the problem? It's complicated. Life is complicated. That's not an answer. Ethan stared into his coffee, trying to articulate thoughts he'd been avoiding for months. When I got out of the Marines, I made a promise to myself. No more violence. No more situations where I had to make split-second decisions about who lives and dies. I was going to be normal, fix cars, raise my daughter, live a quiet life. And you think taking this job breaks that promise? I think it pulls me back towards something I was trying to leave behind. Vanessa reached across the table, grabbing his hand with a firmness that surprised him. Listen to me. What you did that night in the diner, that wasn't violence. That was protection. There's a difference. You didn't hurt those men because you wanted to. You stopped them because someone needed you to. And from what you've told me about this job, that's all it is. Using your skills to protect people, to make them safer. That's not the same as what you did in the war, isn't it? No. Because in war, someone tells you who the enemy is and you don't get to question it. But this? You're choosing to protect people. You're using everything you learned in the worst circumstances to create something good. That's not breaking your promise, Ethan. That's honoring it. Her words hit him harder than he expected, cutting through months of self-doubt and carefully constructed rationalizations. Maybe she was right. Maybe he'd been so afraid of becoming the person he'd been in combat that he'd lost sight of why he'd been that person in the first place. There's something else, Vanessa said, a knowing look in her eyes. You like her. Who? Don't play dumb. This Amelia woman. You talk about her different than you talk about other people. She's my employer. She's someone who sees you for who you really are, and that terrifies you. Vanessa squeezed his hand. 2 years ago, you lost Sarah. I know that. I know you think that loving someone again means betraying her memory or risking that kind of loss again. But Ethan, you can't live your whole life in a holding pattern, waiting for permission to be happy. I am happy. You're content. That's different. Content is settling. Happy is living. They talked for another hour, Vanessa's relationship problems turning out to be minor compared to the emotional excavation she was performing on Ethan's carefully guarded heart. By the time they parted ways, with Vanessa heading back to the hospital and Ethan heading to pick up Grace from the party, he felt raw and uncertain and more alive than he had in months. The following week, Ethan called Amelia and accepted her offer. The transition happened faster than he'd expected. Within a month, he'd hired an assistant manager for the shop, a retired mechanic named Frank, who was thrilled to have something to do besides golf and complain about his arthritis. Miguel got a raise and more responsibility. And Ethan found himself splitting his time between Riverside and Chicago, between transmissions and security protocols, between the life he'd known and the life he was building. Grace adapted with the resilience of children, excited by the adventure of it all, by the train rides to Chicago and the new people she met and the robots that Sarah kept showing her. She'd started talking about studying engineering when she grew up, about building things that helped people, and Ethan couldn't help but see Amelia's influence in that ambition. April brought warm weather and a problem that would test everything Ethan had been building. He was at Hart Industries' main facility, reviewing quarterly security reports with the team he'd assembled, when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Mr. Ward? The voice was shaky, scared. This is Vanessa. I need help. His entire body went on alert. What's wrong? My ex, the one I told you about, he showed up at the hospital, made threats. Security escorted him out, but he's been texting me saying he knows where I live, that he's going to make me sorry. Ethan, I'm scared. Where are you now? Still at work. My shift ends in 2 hours and I don't want to go home alone. Ethan was already moving, grabbing his jacket, motioning to his assistant that he needed to leave. Text me your address. I'm coming to get you. We'll figure this out. He found Amelia in her office and explained the situation in clipped, efficient sentences. Her response was immediate. Take my car. It's faster than yours and the windows are bulletproof. Your windows are bulletproof? I deal with sensitive corporate information. It's a precaution. She was already pulling keys from her desk drawer. And I'm coming with you. Amelia, you don't need to... A woman is being threatened by a violent ex. You're not going alone and neither is she. We're wasting time arguing. 20 minutes later, they were pulling up to the hospital in Amelia's sleek black sedan, finding Vanessa waiting near the staff entrance, looking smaller and more frightened than Ethan had ever seen her. She slid into the back seat, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. God, thank you. He's been outside my apartment. My neighbor called and said there's a man matching his description just sitting in his car across the street. Did you call the police? Amelia asked, turning in her seat to look at Vanessa. I have a restraining order, but it's just paper. The cops can make him leave, but they can't stay there all night. And once they're gone... She didn't finish the sentence. Ethan's mind was already working through options, scenarios, solutions. This was what he did. Assess threats and neutralize them. But this wasn't a corporate facility with cameras and security guards. This was a woman's home, her life, her safety. "You can't go home tonight," he said. "Not until we have a plan. I don't have anywhere else to go. My family's in California. My friends all have their own problems." "You'll stay with me," Amelia said, and both Ethan and Vanessa turned to stare at her. "I have a guest house. It's secure, private, and my building has 24-hour security that actually knows what they're doing. You'll be safe there while we figure out something more permanent." "I can't impose." "You're not imposing. You're accepting help from people who care about what happens to you." Amelia's voice was firm. "Ethan, we should probably verify the situation at her apartment first. See if he's actually there." They drove to Vanessa's building, a modest complex in a quiet neighborhood. Sure enough, a beat-up Toyota was parked across the street, and inside Ethan could make out the shape of a man, the glow of a phone screen illuminating his face. "That's him," Vanessa whispered from the back seat. "That's Marcus." Ethan studied the situation with tactical precision. The man wasn't trying to hide. He wanted Vanessa to know he was there, wanted her to feel hunted. Classic intimidation tactics from someone who used fear as a weapon. "I'm going to have a conversation with him," Ethan said. "Ethan, no," Vanessa started. "I'm not going to hurt him. I'm just going to make sure he understands that continuing this behavior is a very poor choice." He climbed out of the car before either woman could protest further, walking across the street with deliberate calm, the kind of body language that broadcasts confidence and capability. As he approached the Toyota, the man inside looked up, and Ethan saw the calculation in his eyes, assessing threat level, deciding whether to run or fight. Ethan tapped on the window. After a moment, Marcus lowered it halfway. "Help you with something?" His voice was aggressive, trying to establish dominance. "Yeah, you can start by explaining why you're violating a restraining order." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. You're Marcus. You've been texting threats to Vanessa Chen, who you were specifically ordered by a judge to stay away from. Now you're parked outside her apartment. That's not just violating the restraining order. That's stalking. That's jail time." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm someone who cares about what happens to Vanessa. And I'm someone who's really hoping you're smart enough to start your car and drive away right now, because if you don't, I'm going to call the police, and you're going to spend the night explaining to them why you thought this was a good idea. This is a public street. I can park wherever I want." Ethan leaned down, his voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave right now. You're going to delete Vanessa's number from your phone. You're going to forget her address, forget her workplace, forget she exists. And if I ever hear that you've contacted her again, if I even hear that you've driven past her apartment, I will make it my personal mission to ensure that every single violation gets reported, documented, and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Do you understand me?" Something in Ethan's voice, in his eyes, in the way he held himself, must have communicated that this wasn't an empty threat. Marcus swallowed, nodded once. "Good. Now drive." Marcus started the car and pulled away, tires squealing slightly, and Ethan watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Then he pulled out his phone and called the police anyway, reporting the violation, making sure there was an official record. When he returned to Amelia's car, both women were staring at him. "What did you say to him?" Vanessa asked. "Just explained his options in a way he could understand." Ethan climbed back into the passenger seat. "I filed a police report. They'll be looking for him, but you're still not staying here tonight." They stopped at Vanessa's apartment long enough for her to pack a bag, Ethan and Amelia flanking her like bodyguards, hyper-aware of every shadow and sound. Then they drove to Amelia's building in Lincoln Park, a converted brownstone that screamed old money and good taste. The guest house was more like a luxury apartment, full kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, with a tub that could fit 3 people. Vanessa looked around with wide eyes. "This is too much." "This is necessary," Amelia said. "Stay as long as you need. My building security knows you're here, and they'll keep an eye out for anyone matching Marcus's description." After they'd gotten Vanessa settled, after she'd hugged them both with tears streaming down her face, after they'd promised to check on her tomorrow, Ethan and Amelia found themselves standing in the main house's kitchen, both of them still running on adrenaline. "You were amazing," Amelia said quietly. The way you handled that situation. Calm, controlled, effective. I just did what needed doing. Stop, Amelia said, and there was an edge to her voice now. That stop minimizing yourself. Stop pretending that what you did wasn't extraordinary. You saved that woman twice now, once from those drunks in the diner, and tonight from someone who might have seriously hurt her. That matters. You matter. Ethan opened his mouth to deflect again, but something in Amelia's expression stopped him. She was looking at him with an intensity that made his heart race, made all his carefully maintained defenses feel suddenly paper-thin. I hired you because I saw something in you that night in the diner, she continued. A man who couldn't ignore someone in trouble, who stepped up when everyone else looked away. But over these past months, I've discovered you're so much more than that. You're brilliant at what you do. You're patient with grace. You're kind to people who work for you. She stopped, seeming to catch herself, to pull back from whatever she'd been about to say. I'm what? Ethan asked softly. You're someone I didn't expect to find. The kitchen felt suddenly too small, the air charged with something Ethan couldn't name but could definitely feel. Amelia was standing close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive, could see the pulse point at her throat, could feel the heat radiating from her body. Amelia, he said, his voice rough, I can't. I know, you're not ready. I understand. She stepped back, giving him space, but her eyes stayed locked on his. But I need you to know that when you are ready, I'll be here. His phone buzzed, shattering the moment. A text from Grace. Party's over. Emma's mom is bringing me home. Love you. Reality crashed back. He had a daughter waiting for him, a life that couldn't accommodate the kind of complication that Amelia represented. But standing in her kitchen, watching her carefully rebuild the professional distance between them, Ethan felt something shift inside his chest. Maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe he'd been in a holding pattern for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to actually want something for himself. I should go, he said. Grace will be home soon. Of course. Thank you for tonight. For everything. The drive back to Riverside felt longer than usual, Ethan's mind spinning through the evening's events, through Amelia's words, through the feeling of standing in her kitchen and wanting something he wasn't sure he had the right to want. He'd thought accepting her job offer was the big risk, the major life change. But he was starting to realize that the job was just the beginning. The real risk, the real change, was standing in front of him in the form of a brilliant, intense woman who saw past all his defenses and liked what she found anyway. Grace was already home when he arrived, chattering about the party and the games and the cake. He listened with half his attention, the other half still in that kitchen in Lincoln Park, still hearing Amelia's voice saying, When you are ready, I'll be here. That night, after Grace was asleep, Ethan pulled out his laptop and did something he'd been avoiding for 2 years. He looked at photos of Sarah, his late wife, Grace's mother, the woman who'd been taken from them by a drunk driver on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Her smile looked back at him from the screen, warm and familiar and gone. He'd loved her completely. He still did. But looking at her now, he thought about what Vanessa had said, about living versus existing, about giving himself permission to be happy again. I miss you, he whispered to the empty room, but I think I'm ready to figure out what comes next. The photos didn't answer, of course, but somewhere in his chest, the knot of grief that had been his constant companion for 2 years loosened just slightly, making room for something else, something that felt like hope. Monday morning found him back at Hart Industries for a scheduled meeting. Amelia was professional, focused, giving no indication of what had passed between them. But when their eyes met across the conference table, Ethan saw something there that matched what he was feeling. Possibility. Promise. The beginning of something neither of them could have predicted, but both were brave enough to explore. And in the guest house behind Amelia's brownstone, Vanessa woke up feeling safe for the first time in months, protected by people who'd become friends, who'd stepped up when she needed them most. Sometimes, Ethan thought, the storms don't just pass. Sometimes they rearrange everything, breaking old patterns and making space for new ones. And sometimes the people who shelter you through the storm become the ones you can't imagine living without. The question was whether he was brave enough to admit that. The answer, he was starting to realize, might be yes. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon that started ordinary and became anything but, Ethan learned that sometimes the universe doesn't wait for you to be ready. He was at the shop in Riverside, elbow deep in a transmission rebuild, when his phone lit up with Amelia's name. Not a text this time, but an actual call, which immediately set off alarm bells in his head. In the months they'd been working together, Amelia had respected his shop time, communicating through messages that he could respond to when convenient. A call meant urgency. "Amelia?" Her voice came through tight and controlled, but underneath he heard something he'd never heard from her before. Fear. "Ethan, I need you in Chicago, now." "What's wrong?" "I can't explain over the phone. Please, I'm sending a car to pick you up. 20 minutes. The line went dead before he could protest. Ethan stood there for a moment, grease-stained and confused, then made a decision. He called Grace's school, confirmed she could stay late in the aftercare program, then told Miguel he was leaving and to close up for the day if he didn't make it back. "Everything okay, boss?" Miguel asked, reading the tension in Ethan's shoulders. "Don't know yet, but I have a feeling it's not good." The black SUV that pulled up towards auto repair 18 minutes later was not Amelia's usual sedan. This was something else entirely, armored, judging by the weight of the doors, with windows that were definitely bulletproof and a driver who had the bearing of someone with serious training. He didn't speak, just nodded when Ethan climbed in, and then they were moving, fast but not recklessly, cutting through traffic with the efficiency of someone who knew how to drive under pressure. Ethan used the time to mentally prepare, running through scenarios. Corporate espionage? Physical threat? Something to do with Vanessa's ex, who'd been quiet since that night 3 weeks ago, but hadn't been arrested? He tried calling Amelia back, but it went straight to voicemail. The SUV didn't take him to Hart Industries' main building. Instead, they headed to the suburbs, to a location Ethan recognized as the new research facility he'd assessed back in February. But something was wrong. There were police cars in the parking lot, their lights painting everything in alternating shades of blue and red. A perimeter had been established, keeping employees and curious onlookers at a distance. The driver pulled up to the police line, showed credentials that made the officer wave them through, and stopped near the building's entrance where Amelia stood talking to a man in a suit that screamed federal agent. She saw Ethan approaching and the relief on her face was palpable. She excused herself from the agent and met Ethan halfway, and up close he could see the strain around her eyes, the way her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "Thank you for coming. What happened?" "About 2 hours ago, 3 men forced their way into the building. They were after prototype defense technology we've been developing, something that would be worth millions on the black market. Our security team engaged them, but during the confrontation they took hostages." Ethan's blood went cold. "How many?" 4 employees. They're barricaded in the server room on the 3rd floor. Amelia's voice wavered slightly. "One of them is Sarah, from the robotics lab, the one Grace has been working with." Everything in Ethan's world narrowed to a single, sharp point of focus. Sarah, who'd been kind to his daughter, who'd sparked Grace's love of engineering, who was now trapped in a room with armed men who'd already demonstrated a willingness to use force. What did the police say? "FBI's negotiating. They've got tactical teams on standby, but the men are threatening to harm the hostages if anyone tries to breach. They're demanding transportation, money, the prototype designs, standard playbook for this kind of thing." She paused, meeting his eyes. "Ethan, they know about you." "What do you mean?" "The lead negotiator, Agent Morrison." She gestured to the man in the suit. "He reviewed our security footage from when the men entered. He said their tactics were professional, probably ex-military or mercenary. He wants someone who understands that mindset to consult on the negotiation strategy. He wants me. I want you. I need you. Those people in there, they're my responsibility. I hired them. I promised them they'd be safe. And now..." Her voice broke, and for the first time since he'd met her, Ethan saw Amelia's carefully maintained composure crack completely. "I don't know what to do, but I know you'll see something everyone else is missing. You always do." Ethan looked at the building, at the police perimeter, at the tactical teams staging in strategic positions. Every instinct told him to walk away, to let the professionals handle it, to stay out of situations where split-second decisions meant the difference between people living and dying. But Sarah was in there, and before he could talk himself out of it, he was moving toward Agent Morrison. The agent turned as Ethan approached, sizing him up with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent a career reading people. "You must be Ward. Amelia's been talking about you for the last hour." "What's the current situation?" Morrison pulled out a tablet, showing Ethan a building schematic. 3 hostiles, all armed with handguns and what appears to be a single rifle. They've got 4 hostages in the 3rd-floor server room, here. Building has 1 main entrance, emergency exits on the east and west sides, but all access points are covered by our tactical teams. The hostiles have been communicating through one of the hostages' phones. No demands yet that they're actually serious about. They keep changing what they want, which tells me they're making this up as they go. "That's good and bad," Ethan said, studying the schematic. "Good because it means they don't have a solid plan. Bad because desperate, confused people make mistakes, and hostages pay for those mistakes." "Exactly my read," Morrison gestured to the building. "We've been trying to establish a dialogue, but the main hostile calls himself Cole. He's agitated, aggressive. Keeps saying he knows what we're trying to do, that he's not going to fall for hostage negotiation tricks. Claims he's been through the training, which suggests military background." Ethan felt something click in his mind, pieces of information arranging themselves into a picture. "Let me hear his voice." Morrison pulled up an audio file from the most recent communication. A man's voice, harsh with stress and adrenaline, came through the tablet's speaker. "Don't care what you think you can offer us. We came here for one thing, and we're not leaving without it. And if you try anything, if you send your tactical boys in here, these people die first. We're not amateurs, we know the playbook. So stop wasting time and give us what we want." Ethan listened to the cadence, the phrasing, the way Cole emphasized certain words. Then he listened again and again. "He's scared," Ethan said finally. Morrison frowned. "He sounds aggressive to me." "That's what he wants you to hear, but listen to how he keeps saying, 'We know what we're doing, and we're not amateurs.' He's trying to convince himself as much as you. This isn't someone comfortable with the situation. This is someone in over his head trying to project confidence he doesn't feel. If he's scared, that makes him more dangerous. Or more predictable." Ethan pointed to the schematic. "The server room? It has windows? 2 facing the parking lot. Why?" "Because scared people want to see what's coming. They're going to be watching those windows, expecting tactical teams to rappel down or breach from above, which means they're not watching the interior approaches as carefully." Morrison studied him with new interest. "Amelia said you were Force Recon." "Long time ago. Not long enough that you've forgotten how to think tactically." Morrison gestured to one of his team members, a woman with short, dark hair and the focused intensity of someone used to high-stakes situations. "Ward, this is Special Agent Chen, our lead negotiator. Chen, this is the security consultant Amelia Hart brought in." Chen shook Ethan's hand with a grip that said she didn't care about his credentials, she cared about results. "You have thoughts on how to approach this?" "Cole keeps saying he's not going to fall for negotiation tricks. That suggests someone taught him to recognize negotiation tactics. Probably military training, probably counter-interrogation techniques. He's expecting you to build rapport, to humanize the hostages, to offer him a way out that preserves his ego." "Standard negotiation strategy," Chen confirmed, "which means it won't work on him. He'll see it coming and reject it because accepting would mean admitting he's following your script." Ethan thought for a moment, turning the problem over in his mind like a mechanical puzzle with moving parts. "What if you gave him what he thinks he wants?" Morrison's eyebrows shot up. "You want us to hand over the prototype?" "No, I want you to pretend to. Look, Cole's scared and confused, but he's also committed. He can't back down without losing face, without admitting this whole thing was a mistake. But if you give him an exit that looks like a win, that lets him tell himself he accomplished his mission, he might take it." Chen was already nodding, seeing where Ethan was going. "We tell him we'll provide the prototype designs, arrange transportation, whatever he wants, but it has to happen on our terms, which means releasing the hostages as a show of good faith." "Exactly. Frame it as him being in control, him calling the shots. Appeal to his ego while slowly walking him toward the exit we want him to take." Morrison looked skeptical. "That's assuming he's rational enough to take the deal." He's military. Military training is built on following protocols, on understanding that every mission has objectives and extraction plans. Right now, he doesn't have an extraction plan. He's trapped in a building surrounded by federal agents with no clear path out. Give him that path and he'll take it, even if part of him knows it's a trap, because the alternative is admitting complete failure. The three of them stood there, police lights painting everything in blue and red, the weight of 4 lives hanging in the balance. Then Morrison made a decision. Okay, we try it your way, but Ward, if this goes sideways, if those hostages get hurt. It won't, Ethan said with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. Let me talk to him. Chen set up a direct line to the phone Cole had been using, and Ethan found himself holding a cell phone with 4 lives on the other end. He'd done this before, in other places, under different circumstances. But that knowledge didn't make the weight any lighter. Cole, this is Ethan Ward. I'm a security consultant working with Hart Industries. A pause. Then, the hell do I care who you are? You care because I'm the one who's going to get you out of this situation alive. We've got the leverage here, not you. You've got 4 scared people in a room with no exit strategy. That's not leverage. That's a countdown to catastrophe. Ethan kept his voice calm, conversational, the same tone he'd used discussing transmission problems. But here's the thing. I don't think you wanted it to go this way. I think you came here for a specific objective. Things went wrong. And now you're trying to figure out how to salvage the mission. Another pause, longer this time. You don't know anything about our mission. I know you're looking for defense prototype designs. I know you're ex-military, probably contractors now, working for someone who promised you good money for a quick job. And I know that right now, surrounded by federal agents with no clear exit, you're trying to figure out how this ends with you walking away. So what are you offering? Cole's voice had shifted, less aggressive, more calculating. Information exchange. You let one hostage go as a gesture of good faith. In return, I'll tell you exactly how we can make this work. How you get what you came for, and how you get out safely. You think I'm stupid? I let a hostage go. I lose leverage. You have 4 hostages. Releasing 1 leaves you with 3, which is still plenty of leverage, and it shows you're willing to negotiate in good faith. That matters to the people making decisions out here. Ethan paused, then played his card. Here's what you need to understand, Cole. Right now, this is a hostage situation. Nobody's hurt, nobody's dead. You're looking at federal prison time, yeah, but you'll survive it. But the moment someone gets hurt, the moment this becomes a casualty situation, every tactical team out here gets the green light to end this with extreme prejudice. And I know you're good, but you're not good enough to survive a coordinated FBI assault. Nobody is. Silence on the line. Ethan could almost hear Cole thinking, weighing options, calculating odds. How do I know you'll keep your word? Cole asked finally. Because I don't care about putting you in jail. I care about getting those 4 people out safely. You cooperate, you make this easy, and I'll make sure everyone knows it. That counts for something when it comes time for sentencing. More silence. Then, 1 hostage. The guy with the glasses, the older one. He's got a medical condition, keeps saying he needs his medication. I'll send him out. Smart choice. Send him to the main entrance. We'll have medical personnel waiting. And then we talk about the prototype? Then we talk about how you get out of this alive. 10 minutes later, a man in his 50s stumbled out of the building's main entrance, blinking in the afternoon sunlight, immediately surrounded by EMTs. Morrison's team debriefed him quickly. 3 hostiles, all armed, 1 rifle confirmed, hostages unharmed so far, but terrified. Sarah and the other 2 were being kept in the corner of the server room, away from windows. Ethan was back on the phone with Cole before the man even finished his medical assessment. I kept my word, your turn. Okay, here's the deal. We've prepared a data package with the prototype designs you're looking for, but it's encrypted and we're not giving you the encryption key until all remaining hostages are released. I'm not finished. We're also going to provide transportation. A van parked at the east exit, keys in the ignition, full tank of gas. No tracking devices, no tricks. You release the hostages, you take the data package, you drive away. We don't pursue, we don't engage. You get a 30-minute head start before we even report which direction you went. Why would you do that? Because this ends one of two ways, Cole. Either you walk out of here with what you came for, or tactical teams breach that room and nobody walks out. I'm offering you the first option. But it only works if everyone cooperates, if nobody gets hurt, if this stays a theft instead of becoming a tragedy. He could hear Cole breathing on the other end, could hear mumbled conversation as Cole discussed it with his companions. Then, how do we know the data package is real? We'll provide verification, sample data that matches what you're looking for, but the full package only comes after the hostages are released. That's non-negotiable. I need to think about it. You've got 30 minutes. After that, the people making decisions out here stop listening to me and start listening to the tactical team commanders who want to end this the hard way. Ethan ended the call and found Morrison and Chen staring at him. Did you just promise them a clean getaway? Morrison asked, his voice tight. I promised them a van in 30 minutes. I didn't promise the van would actually start after they got in it, or that we wouldn't have aerial surveillance tracking their every move. Ethan met Morrison's eyes. But they don't know that. Right now they're weighing their options, and the option I gave them looks a lot better than the alternative. Chen was nodding slowly. It's risky. If they take the deal and somehow actually get away, they won't. But more importantly, the hostages will be safe. That's the priority. Amelia had been standing back, letting the professionals work, but now she stepped forward. Will it work? I don't know, Ethan admitted, but it's the best option we have. Cole's scared and trapped and trying to salvage something from a situation that's spiraling out of control. I'm giving him a lifeline that lets him tell himself he won. Whether he's smart enough to take it is another question. The 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. Ethan spent the time working with Morrison's tactical teams, reviewing building schematics, identifying every possible contingency. If this went wrong, if Cole rejected the deal or hurt the hostages, Ethan wanted to make sure there was a response plan that didn't end with everyone dead. But underneath the tactical planning, his mind kept circling back to Sarah, trapped in that room with 3 desperate men. Grace's friend, the engineer who'd been patient and kind and everything a mentor should be. If something happened to her because Ethan's plan failed, he didn't know how he'd live with that. 28 minutes into the deadline, Cole called back. We'll take the deal. But I want to see the van first, want verification that it's really there and not some trick. Stand at the window on the east side, you'll see it. Morrison had already positioned the van exactly where Ethan specified, visible from the server room's eastern window. Through binoculars, Ethan watched as a figure appeared briefly at the window, looking down at the parking lot, then disappeared. Okay, van's there. Now, show me the data package. Chen held up a tablet near the building's entrance, displaying file names and sample data that looked exactly like what sophisticated defense prototypes would generate. Technical enough to be convincing, but not actually revealing anything sensitive. Satisfied? Ethan asked. How do we get it? Release the hostages. All 3, main entrance. The moment they're clear, we leave the tablet on the ground and step back. You come down, grab it, get in the van, and drive. Simple. How do we know you won't shoot us the moment we appear? Because I gave you my word, and because if we were going to shoot you, we'd have done it already. Ethan paused. Cole, you're out of time. Make the call. Another agonizing minute of silence. Then, okay, we're sending them out. But if this is a trick, if your people try anything, no tricks. You kept your word, I'll keep mine. 5 minutes later, the building's main entrance opened, and 3 people stumbled out, blinking in the afternoon light. Sarah was in the middle, her arm around a younger woman who was sobbing, helping to support her. Behind them came a man in his 30s, looking dazed but unharmed. The moment they cleared the entrance, tactical teams swarmed forward, pulling them to safety, surrounding them with EMTs and FBI agents. Amelia ran toward Sarah, and Ethan watched as they embraced, watched Amelia's carefully maintained composure finally break completely as she held her employee and friend. Morrison's team had positioned the tablet exactly as promised, leaving it on the ground before retreating to a safe distance. And then they waited. Every tactical team trained on the entrance, every sniper with a clear line of sight, ready to end this if Cole and his men tried anything stupid. The door opened. 3 men emerged, moving fast, heads on swivel, the lead carrying the rifle while the other two had handguns drawn. They grabbed the tablet, scanned the parking lot for threats, then ran for the van. "All units hold position," Morrison said into his radio. "Let them go." The van started on the first try, pulled out of the parking lot, and disappeared down the access road. The moment it was out of sight, Morrison was on his phone, coordinating with aerial surveillance and local police departments, tracking the van's progress, waiting for the perfect moment to end this. 20 minutes later, word came through. The van had been stopped at a police checkpoint 15 miles away. All three men were in custody, the data tablet recovered, no shots fired. Clean, professional, exactly how it was supposed to go. The parking lot erupted in controlled chaos, agents confirming details, tactical teams standing down, EMTs clearing hostages for transport to hospitals for evaluation. Ethan stood at the edge of it all, feeling the familiar post-mission crash, the way adrenaline drained away and left exhaustion in its wake. Then Amelia was there, standing in front of him with tears streaming down her face and an expression he couldn't quite read. "You saved them, Sarah and the others. You—" Her voice broke, and she didn't finish the sentence. It was a team effort. Morrison and Chen did the actual work. "Stop." She reached out, grabbed his hand, held it tightly. "Just this once, stop deflecting and accept that you did something extraordinary. You saved 4 people today because you saw a solution nobody else could see, because you understood how to reach someone everyone else had written off as unreasonable. That's not luck, Ethan. That's brilliance." "I was terrified the entire time," he admitted quietly. "Every second I kept thinking, what if I'm wrong? What if this makes it worse? What if someone dies because I convinced them to try this approach? But they didn't die. They're safe. And that's because of you." Agent Morrison approached, extending his hand to Ethan. "That was some of the best tactical psychology I've seen in 20 years with the Bureau. Where'd you learn to negotiate like that?" "Fallujah, Kandahar, a dozen villages whose names I can't pronounce. When you're trying to win hearts and minds, you learn to understand what people need to hear to make the choice you want them to make." "Well, it worked. Cole and his men are already talking, trying to cut deals. Turns out they were hired by a competitor trying to steal Hart Industries' defense contracts. We'll have the whole network rolled up within the week." Morrison paused. "Listen, if you ever want to consult with the Bureau, we could use someone with your skill set. Not full-time necessarily, but situations like this where hostage negotiation needs someone who thinks tactically. I appreciate the offer, but you've got a daughter and a life that doesn't include getting called out for crisis situations. I get it, but think about it anyway." Morrison handed Ethan a business card. "FBI could use more people who actually care about getting everyone home alive." As Morrison walked away to coordinate the aftermath, Ethan found himself standing alone with Amelia in the parking lot, police lights still painting everything in alternating shades of blue and red. "You should go to her," Ethan said, nodding toward where Sarah sat wrapped in a blanket, surrounded by EMTs. "She needs to know her boss cares." "She already knows. I told her when I pulled her out." Amelia turned to face him fully. "Ethan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay. Are you happy? Not content, not managing, actually happy? Because I've spent 6 months watching you transform my company, watching you be brilliant at something you keep insisting isn't who you are anymore. And I keep wondering if maybe the person you've been trying to be for the last 3 years isn't actually who you're meant to be." The question hit him harder than he'd expected, cutting through all the rationalizations and carefully constructed defenses. Was he happy, or had he just been hiding, using Grace and the shop and the quiet life as an excuse not to risk caring about something beyond basic survival? "I don't know," he said finally. "I thought I did, but after today—" He gestured at the building, at the aftermath of a crisis he'd helped resolve. "I forgot what this feels like. Using these skills for something that matters, making a difference that's bigger than fixing someone's transmission. What if you didn't have to choose? What if you could have both? The shop and Grace and the quiet life, but also this, the work that actually challenges you, that uses everything you are instead of just part of it?" "Amelia, I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm asking you to be completely who you are, without apology, without holding back." She took a breath, steadied herself. And I'm asking you to consider that maybe what we've been building these past months is more than just a professional relationship. Maybe it's something neither of us expected, but both of us need. Before Ethan could respond, before he could process what she was saying and what it meant, his phone rang. Grace's school. His heart jumped into his throat as he answered. Mr. Ward, everything's fine, but Grace is asking when you're picking her up. Aftercare ends at 6, and it's almost 5:30 now. Relief flooded through him. I'm in Chicago. I'll be there as soon as I can. Can she stay until 6:30? Of course. Drive safe. He ended the call and found Amelia watching him with understanding in her eyes. Go. Grace needs you. We can talk about this later. Amelia, what you said? Later. Go be a dad. That's always the most important thing. The drive back to Riverside was a blur, Ethan's mind spinning through the day's events, through what Amelia had said, through the feeling of standing in that parking lot doing work that actually mattered. He made it to the school at 6:25, found Grace waiting in the aftercare room with her nose buried in a robotics manual. Daddy! She launched herself into his arms. You're late. Miss Jennifer said you were in Chicago for work. Was it important? Very important and complicated. But I'm here now. On the drive home, Grace chattered about her day, about the math test she'd aced and the story she'd written about robots who learned to feel emotions. Ethan listened with half his attention, the other half still processing everything, still trying to figure out what came next. That night, after Grace was asleep, Ethan found himself standing in his kitchen with his phone in his hand, staring at Amelia's contact information. He drafted a text half a dozen times, deleting each one because words felt inadequate to capture what he was feeling. Finally, he settled on something simple. Thank you for today, for trusting me with something that important. Her response came almost immediately. You're the only person I would have trusted with it. Sleep well, Ethan. He stared at those words for a long time, at the way she'd used his first name, at the implication that she'd been waiting for his message, hoping he'd reach out. Maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding behind the life he'd built and start actually living it. The question was whether he was brave enough to take that step. The answer, increasingly, was beginning to feel like yes. The answer came sooner than Ethan expected, delivered not through some grand moment of clarity, but through the accumulation of small truths that became impossible to ignore. It started 3 days after the hostage crisis, when Sarah showed up at Ward's auto repair with a box of donuts and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ethan was under a Honda Civic when Miguel called out that he had a visitor, and he rolled out from beneath the chassis to find the robotics engineer standing in his shop, looking simultaneously grateful and traumatized. I wanted to thank you, Sarah said without preamble. Amelia told me what you did, how you talked Cole down, how you're the reason I'm standing here instead of... She stopped, swallowed hard. Instead of not standing here. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag, uncomfortable with the gratitude. I'm glad you're safe. How are you holding up? Therapy twice a week, nightmares most nights, and a newfound appreciation for boring routines. She attempted a laugh that came out shaky. But I'm alive, and that's because of you. I needed you to know that matters, that you matter. After she left, Ethan stood in his shop surrounded by the familiar smell of motor oil and metal and felt the disconnect more sharply than ever. This place had been his refuge, his escape from a life defined by violence and split-second decisions. But increasingly, it felt less like refuge and more like hiding. That evening, Grace was working on a robot at the kitchen table, her tongue sticking out in concentration the way it always did when she was focused, when she looked up and asked the question that changed everything. Daddy, are you going to marry Ms. Hart? Ethan nearly dropped the pot he was washing. What? Why would you ask that? Because you smile different when you talk about her, like how you used to smile in pictures with Mommy. Grace's voice was matter-of-fact, the brutal honesty of children who haven't learned to dance around difficult truths. And because she looks at you like you're important, I think maybe you should marry her. It's not that simple, baby. Why not? You like her. She likes you. That's how it works in the stories. Real life is more complicated than stories. Grace considered this, then returned to her robot with a shrug that said adults were weird, but she'd accept it for now. But the question lingered in Ethan's mind long after she'd gone to bed. bouncing around his thoughts like a pinball he couldn't catch. Did he want to marry Amelia? The question felt simultaneously premature and overdue, like he'd been avoiding asking it because he already knew the answer and wasn't ready to deal with the implications. He found himself at Vanessa's apartment the next afternoon, ostensibly to check on her. Marcus had been sentenced to 6 months in jail for violating the restraining order, and she was finally feeling safe enough to return home, but really because he needed someone to tell him he wasn't crazy. "You're overthinking this," Vanessa said, pouring coffee with the ease of someone who'd become comfortable with Ethan's habit of showing up when he needed to talk. "Actually, no, you're underthinking it. You're so busy analyzing whether you should have these feelings that you're not actually dealing with the fact that you already do. That's not, Ethan, you coordinated a hostage negotiation to save her employee. You drive to Chicago twice a month, even though you hate city traffic. You light up when you talk about her, which Grace noticed because children notice everything. At what point do you admit that you've fallen for this woman?" The words hung in the air between them, truth dressed in uncomfortable clarity. Fallen for her. Had he? When had that happened? Was it the first night in the diner when she'd seen past his carefully maintained disguise? Was it the day she'd shown up at his shop and refused to take no for an answer? Was it the moment in her kitchen when she'd said, "When you're ready, I'll be here"? Or had it been all of those moments, accumulated like interest, building into something he could no longer pretend didn't exist? "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he said quietly. Vanessa reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Nobody's ever ready for the things that matter most. You weren't ready to lose Sarah, his late wife, the ghost that still haunted the edges of his life. But you survived it. You weren't ready to be a single father, but Grace is thriving because of you. You weren't ready to step into that diner and protect a stranger, but you did it anyway. Being ready is overrated. Sometimes you just have to be brave." "What if I mess it up? What if I let her down? Or Grace gets attached and something goes wrong? Or what if it works? What if you let yourself have this thing that clearly makes you happy, and it's everything you're afraid to hope for?" Vanessa squeezed his hand. "You can't live your whole life in a defensive crouch, protecting yourself from possibilities because you're scared of pain. That's not living, Ethan. That's just surviving. And you deserve more than that." He drove home through the spring evening, windows down, letting the May air wash over him, and made a decision. He was going to tell Amelia how he felt, not hide behind professionalism or deflect with self-deprecation or pretend that what had been building between them was anything other than what it clearly was. He was going to be brave. The opportunity came 2 weeks later, during what was supposed to be a routine consultation visit that turned into something else entirely. Ethan had arrived at Hard Industries Friday afternoon with Grace in tow, planning to review quarterly security assessments before heading home. But Amelia had other plans. "I want to show you something," she said, and there was an excitement in her voice that Ethan had learned to recognize as significant. She drove them to a property on the outskirts of Chicago, a converted firehouse that had been renovated into something extraordinary. The ground floor was a massive workspace, exposed brick, high ceilings, equipment bays that could easily accommodate vehicles. The second floor had been transformed into office space and living quarters, all open concept and full of light. "What is this place?" Ethan asked, walking through the space with Grace running ahead, exclaiming over every new discovery. "It's yours, if you want it." And Amelia's voice was carefully neutral, but he could hear the hope underneath. "I've been thinking about what you said, about not wanting to choose between your old life and whatever we're building. So I found a solution. This could be Ward's Auto Repair, Chicago location, full shop equipment, lift systems, everything you'd need. The upstairs is living space, 3 bedrooms, full kitchen, enough room for Grace to have her own workshop area." Ethan turned to stare at her. "Amelia, this is too much. It's an investment in my director of security operations. The lease is reasonable, and Hard Industries would cover the first year while you establish the business. You'd still have your Riverside location, but this gives you a base here, a place to work when you're consulting, a way to expand without abandoning what you've built." She paused. "And it gives Grace options. Better schools, more opportunities, a chance to work with Sarah and the robotics team regularly. You bought a building." "I leased a building. There's a difference." "You leased a building to convince me to move to Chicago." I leased a building to give you options. What you do with those options is entirely up to you. But her eyes told a different story, showed him what she wouldn't say out loud. I want you here. I need you here. Please choose this. Grace appeared at the top of the stairs, breathless with excitement. Daddy, come see. There's a room up here that would be perfect for my robots, and the bedroom has windows that look out over the city. Can we live here? Please, can we live here? Ethan looked at his daughter's excited face, at Amelia's carefully hopeful expression, at this building that represented a future he'd been too scared to imagine. And he realized that Vanessa was right. Being ready was overrated. Sometimes you just had to be brave. Can I talk to you? He asked Amelia. Alone? She nodded, and they left Grace exploring upstairs while they stood in the main workshop area, surrounded by empty space that could become whatever they chose to make it. I need to tell you something, Ethan started, then stopped, suddenly finding it difficult to string words together. These past months, working with you, building something together, it's been the best part of my life since Sarah died. You see me, really see me, in a way nobody else does. You challenge me and support me and make me want to be the person I've been too scared to be. Ethan, let me finish, please. He took a breath, steadying himself. I'm falling for you. Maybe I've been falling for you since that first night in the diner, or maybe it happened gradually, and I was too stubborn to notice. But I'm here now, and I'm ready to stop pretending that what I feel is anything other than what it is. Amelia's eyes were shining with unshed tears. I've been waiting for you to say that for 6 months. I've been terrified you never would. I'm terrified I'll mess this up. I'm terrified I'll let you down or that something will happen and I'll lose you the way I lost Sarah. I'm terrified that Grace will get attached and... She crossed the distance between them and kissed him, soft and sure and full of promise. When she pulled back, her hands were framing his face, her thumbs brushing against his cheekbones. I'm terrified too, she whispered. I've built an entire company, negotiated million-dollar contracts, faced down corporate espionage. But nothing has scared me as much as falling in love with you. Because you matter, Ethan. What we're building matters. And yes, it's risky and complicated, and there are no guarantees, but I'd rather have this, us, with all the uncertainty, than spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been. I love you, he said, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff and finding wings. I don't know when it happened, but I love you, and I want to try this. Want to build something together that's bigger than either of us alone. I love you too. She was crying now, happy tears that she didn't bother wiping away. And I want this building to be ours. Not just a business venture, but a home. A place where we figure out what our life looks like, where Grace can thrive, where we build something real. From upstairs, Grace's voice echoed down. Are you guys done talking? Because I found where we should put the couch, and I need you to see. They both laughed, the sound bright and full of possibility, and Ethan pulled Amelia close, breathing in the scent of her perfume and the promise of a future he'd been too scared to reach for. The next months moved with the momentum of things that were always meant to happen. Ethan hired additional help for the Riverside shop, promoted Miguel to manager, and began the process of establishing Ward's Auto Repair's Chicago location. Grace transferred schools in September, nervous but excited, thriving in an environment that offered advanced STEM programs and access to Sarah's mentorship 3 times a week. The firehouse became more than just a workspace. It became home. Ethan's tools and equipment on the ground floor, Grace's growing collection of robot projects in her designated workshop area, and the living quarters that Amelia slowly filled with furniture and warmth and the accumulated evidence of a life being built from scratch. They fell into rhythms that felt both new and ancient. Morning coffee together while Grace got ready for school. Evenings spent with Ethan teaching Grace mechanical principles while Amelia reviewed security reports. Weekends exploring the city or driving back to Riverside to check on the original shop. They became a family not through declaration, but through accumulation, through 1,000 small moments that added up to something permanent. Vanessa became a regular presence, bringing her new boyfriend, a paramedic she'd met through the hospital, to dinners where they all laughed too loud and stayed up too late. Miguel visited from Riverside with his wife and kids, his pride in what Ethan had built evident in every word. Sarah and Grace continued their robotics collaboration, the engineer and the protege developing a friendship that transcended their age difference. And through it all, Ethan and Amelia navigated the complications of blending careers and lives and hearts, learning each other's patterns, discovering that love wasn't a destination, but a practice, something you chose every day through actions large and small. It was late October, nearly a year after that first night in the diner, when Ethan took Grace and Amelia back to the Starlight 66. The storm that night had been literal, but looking back, Ethan understood it had been symbolic too, the kind of weather that cleared the air and made space for new growth. They slid into the same corner booth where Ethan and Grace had sat that November evening, and Janice, still working here, still remembering, brought them coffee and hot chocolate without being asked. "You know," Janice said, setting down the cups, "I tell people about what happened here, about the man who stepped up when nobody else would, about how sometimes the quietest people turn out to be heroes. It's become a story people ask about." "I'm not a hero," Ethan said automatically. "You are to that nurse you saved. You are to the 4 people you rescued from that hostage situation. You are to your daughter and to this woman beside you." Janice smiled. "Sometimes heroism isn't about grand gestures. Sometimes it's just about showing up, doing the right thing, and being brave enough to let yourself be seen." After she walked away, Grace looked up from the elaborate drawing she'd been creating on her placemat, a robot made of car parts and circuit boards, protective and strong. "Daddy, do you remember what you told me that night? When those men were being mean?" "What did I tell you, baby?" "You said sometimes you protect people even when you don't want to fight." She looked between Ethan and Amelia. "I think that's what love is too. Protecting each other, even when it's scary." Out of the mouths of children, Ethan thought, reaching for Amelia's hand across the table. Grace had crystallized in a single sentence what he'd spent months learning, that love wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to be vulnerable anyway, to protect and be protected in return. "You're a very wise kid, you know that," Amelia said to Grace. "I know, Daddy tells me all the time." Grace grinned, then returned to her drawing, adding details with the focused intensity she'd inherited from Ethan. That night, after Grace had fallen asleep in the truck on the drive home, after they'd carried her upstairs and tucked her into her bed with her science fair trophy, now joined by several others, on the nightstand, Ethan and Amelia stood in the doorway of her room the way they'd done countless times before. "She's extraordinary," Amelia whispered, and Ethan heard in those words the same wonder he felt every day watching his daughter grow. "She is, and part of that is because of you." He turned to look at Amelia, this woman who'd seen past his defenses, who'd refused to let him hide from his own potential. "You've given her things I couldn't, opportunities, mentorship, a broader world. You've made her life bigger." "We've made her life bigger, together." Amelia leaned into him, and Ethan wrapped his arms around her, feeling the rightness of it, the way they fit like pieces of a puzzle that had been waiting to be completed. They moved to their own bedroom. Their bedroom, shared space, shared life, and lay in the darkness talking the way they often did, processing the day, making plans for tomorrow, comfortable in the silence that came from being truly known by another person. "I've been thinking," Amelia said eventually, "about the future, about what we're building." "Yeah?" "I want to expand Hard Industries' focus. Not just corporate security, but community protection programs. Training for women being stalked, security consultations for nonprofits that can't afford high-end protection, resources for domestic violence survivors. Using what we know to help people who need it most." Ethan felt something warm expand in his chest. This was why he loved her. Not just for who she was, but for how she made him want to be better, do better, use his skills for something that truly mattered. "I think that's brilliant, and I want to be part of it, not just as director of security, but as someone who believes in that mission." He paused. Sarah would have loved that. She always said the best use of strength was protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. They didn't talk about his late wife often. The ghost was there, would always be there, but it had stopped being a barrier and become instead a bridge. A reminder that love didn't erase loss but could coexist with it, could honor it while still moving forward. "I think she'd be proud of you," Amelia said quietly. "Of the father you are, the man you've become, the life you've built. I think she'd be happy you found someone to share it with." Ethan didn't trust himself to speak, so he just held Amelia tighter, feeling the truth of her words, feeling Sarah's blessing in the life he'd been brave enough to claim. December brought snow and the holidays, and Grace's 8th birthday, celebrated with too many presents and a party where she demonstrated her latest robot, a fully autonomous sorting machine that could identify and categorize different materials, to an audience of school friends, engineers from hard industries, and neighbors from both Riverside and Chicago who'd become part of their extended family. Ethan stood at the edge of the chaos, watching Grace explain circuit diagrams to kids her age with the confidence of someone who knew her passion was valuable and felt the weight of gratitude for everything that had led to this moment. "She's going to change the world," Vanessa said, appearing beside him with a plate of cake. "That kid is going to invent something that matters, and it's because you gave her the space to be brilliant." "We gave her the space," Ethan corrected. "You, me, Amelia, Sarah from the lab, Miguel, everyone who's shown up for her. She's got a whole community raising her. That's what kids deserve, what everyone deserves." Vanessa bumped his shoulder with hers. "Look at you, getting all philosophical. Who are you, and what did you do with the grumpy mechanic I met in a diner?" "He's still here. He just learned that being grumpy is exhausting and being happy is more fun." The new year brought new challenges and new opportunities. Hard Industries launched its Community Protection Initiative, with Ethan leading the development of training programs for vulnerable populations. Ward's Auto Repair expanded to 3 locations, Riverside, Chicago, and a new shop in Iowa City that focused on training veterans in automotive skills, giving them pathways to stable employment. Grace continued to thrive, winning first place at the regional science fair with a robot designed to assist elderly people with mobility issues. Sarah had helped with the advanced programming, but the core concept and execution were all Grace's, born from watching her father help others and wanting to do the same. And through it all, Ethan and Amelia built their life together, learning that love wasn't about perfection, but about showing up consistently, about choosing each other through the mundane and the extraordinary, about being brave enough to be vulnerable and strong enough to be soft. It was a Saturday in early spring, almost 18 months after that first night in the diner, when Ethan decided it was time. He'd been planning it for weeks, working with Grace on the details, making sure everything was perfect. Not perfect in the sense of expensive or elaborate, but perfect in the sense of meaningful, of true to who they were as people and what they'd built together. He took Amelia back to the Starlight 66, claiming he wanted to check something about the security system he'd helped them install after the incident. She'd rolled her eyes at his transparent excuse but had come along anyway, indulging him. The diner looked different in daylight, less like a liminal space and more like what it was, a working-class establishment that served decent coffee and witnessed ordinary miracles. But when they walked in, it had been transformed. The corner booth where Ethan and Grace had sat that first night was decorated with simple wildflowers. Fairy lights had been strung along the windows. And sitting in the booth, grinning like she held the world's best secret, was Grace. "What is this?" Amelia asked, looking between Ethan and his daughter. "This is where it started," Ethan said, taking her hands in his. "Where I met someone who changed everything, who saw me when I'd been trying to be invisible, who refused to let me settle for less than I could be." Grace climbed out of the booth, pulling something from her backpack, a robot she'd built specifically for this moment, designed to hold a small velvet box in its mechanical hands. "Ms. Hart, Amelia, you made my daddy smile again," Grace said, suddenly shy but pushing through it with the courage of someone who'd learned bravery from watching her father. "You made our family bigger and better, and we want you to stay forever." The robot whirred to life, extending the box toward Amelia with surprising grace. Ethan took it, opened it to reveal a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, simple, elegant, chosen because it represented continuity and heritage, the passing of love from one generation to the next. "I'm not good at speeches," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm better at fixing things, at solving problems, at actions instead of words. But I need you to hear this. You took a broken, scared man who was hiding from his own life, and you made him want to be whole again. You gave my daughter opportunities I never could have provided alone. You built something with us that's stronger than any of us individually." He got down on one knee, right there in the diner where this had all started, and looked up at the woman who'd refused to let him hide. "Amelia Hart, Will you marry me? Will you let us be your family officially, legally, permanently? Will you take a chance on a mechanic and his weird robot-building daughter and see where this adventure goes?" Amelia was crying, laughing, nodding before he even finished speaking. "Yes, God, yes. Of course, yes." She pulled him up and kissed him while Grace cheered and Janice emerged from the kitchen with a cake she'd apparently been hiding, and the handful of regular customers in the diner applauded like they'd all been part of the story from the beginning. The ring fit perfectly. The moment felt perfect. Not in the sense of flawless, but in the sense of right, of earned, of worth every moment of fear and uncertainty that had led to it. "I love you," Amelia said, looking at the ring, at Grace, at Ethan. "Both of you, my family." "Our family," Grace corrected, "because that's how it works. You're not getting us, we're all getting each other." They stayed at the diner for hours, celebrating with strangers who became friends, with Janice, who kept bringing them coffee and refusing payment, with the ordinary magic of a place that had witnessed a beginning and was now witnessing a promise of forever. The wedding happened 3 months later, a small ceremony in the firehouse they'd transformed into home. Grace was the flower girl and the ring bearer, insisting she could do both jobs because "I'm very capable." Vanessa was Amelia's maid of honor, Miguel was Ethan's best man, and Sarah designed robot decorations that made the whole space feel like it belonged to them specifically. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises about showing up and being brave, and protecting each other through whatever came next. When the officiant pronounced them married, Grace whooped so loud that everyone laughed, and Ethan kissed his wife with his daughter between them, all three of them holding each other, a family bound not by blood, but by choice and love, and the courage to build something new from broken pieces. The reception was chaos in the best way, dancing and speeches and laughter that echoed off the exposed brick walls. At one point, Ethan found himself standing with Miguel and Frank and some of the other mechanics, talking shop the way men do when they're comfortable, when someone asked how he'd gotten so lucky. "I don't think it's luck," Ethan said, watching Amelia dance with Grace, both of them laughing at something private and precious. "I think it's about being brave enough to accept help when it's offered, to let people see you when you're broken, to trust that maybe you deserve good things even when you don't feel worthy of them." Miguel raised his beer. "To being brave, then, and to good things." They all drank to that, to the simple, profound truth that life wasn't about avoiding pain or playing it safe, but about showing up, doing the work, and trusting that the people you loved would catch you when you fell. Later, when the reception had wound down and Grace had fallen asleep on the couch, and it was just Ethan and Amelia in the quiet aftermath, they stood at the window looking out over the city lights. "Do you ever think about that night?" Amelia asked. "The diner, the storm, the moment when everything changed?" "All the time. I think about how close I came to looking away, to staying in my booth and minding my own business, about how different everything would be if I'd made that choice." "But you didn't look away. That's who you are. Someone who steps up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "I'm someone who's still learning to accept that about himself," Ethan admitted. "But I'm working on it, with your help." "With our help," Amelia corrected. And Ethan understood she meant Grace too, meant the entire community they'd built, meant all the people who'd shown up when it mattered. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the city, watching their future unfold in real time, and Ethan felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever when Sarah died, the absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Grace stirred on the couch, mumbling something about servo motors, and they moved together to cover her with a blanket. She'd grown so much in the past 18 months, become so confident and capable, and Ethan knew that was partly his doing, but mostly hers, her own strength and brilliance, flowering in an environment that gave her room to grow. "She's going to be amazing," Amelia whispered. "She already is. We're just along for the ride." That night, lying in bed with his wife, the word still felt new and wonderful, Ethan thought about all the versions of himself he'd been. The Marine who'd learned to fight, the grieving widower who'd learned to survive, the mechanic who'd tried to be invisible, and now this. A husband, a father, a man who'd learned that strength wasn't about walls but about bridges, wasn't about hiding, but about being seen. Thank you, he said into the darkness. For what? Amelia's voice was sleepy, content. For not giving up on me. For seeing something worth pursuing even when I was doing everything possible to convince you otherwise. You're not someone you give up on easily. Besides, I'm very stubborn. Runs in the family. Our family now. Our family, she agreed. And Ethan heard the smile in her voice, felt the promise of all the mornings they'd wake up together, all the problems they'd solve side by side, all the moments ordinary and extraordinary that would comprise their shared life. The months turned into years, and the story continued the way all good stories do, not with a definitive ending, but with ongoing chapters, new challenges, unexpected joys. Grace grew into a teenager who combined her father's mechanical brilliance with her stepmother's business acumen, already talking about engineering programs and patents and changing the world. Ward's Auto Repair became a chain of shops across the Midwest, each one employing veterans and providing training for people who needed second chances. Hart Industries' Community Protection Initiative expanded nationwide, training thousands of people in security awareness and personal safety. And through it all, Ethan and Amelia built their life together, proving every day that love wasn't about perfection, but about persistence, about choosing each other through the mundane and the magnificent, about being brave enough to be vulnerable and strong enough to be soft. Sometimes they went back to the Starlight 66, usually on the anniversary of that first meeting, and sat in their corner booth and remembered the storm that had brought them together. Janice always recognized them, always brought them coffee and hot chocolate, always asked about Grace and the business and the life they'd built. "You two are my favorite story," she told them once. "Proof that good things happen to people who show up when it matters." And Ethan, who'd spent years believing he didn't deserve good things, who'd hidden from his own potential because he was terrified of failing, finally understood that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be happy. Let yourself be loved. Let yourself believe that the storms pass and the morning comes, and the people who matter will be there when you need them. He'd started as a mechanic trying to disappear, a single father just trying to get through each day, a man running from his own capabilities. But he'd become something more, a husband, a leader, a protector. A man who'd learned that strength was about building up rather than breaking down, about creating rather than destroying, about love rather than fear. And on warm summer evenings, when Grace was showing them her latest invention and Amelia was making plans for their next expansion, and the house was full of the comfortable chaos of a family that chose each other every single day, Ethan would think about that night in the diner and feel nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the storm that forced him to stop. Gratitude for the woman who needed help. Gratitude for the CEO who saw his potential. Gratitude for the daughter who gave him reason to be brave. Gratitude for the life assembled from broken pieces that somehow fit together perfectly. Because sometimes the best things in life aren't the ones you plan for. They're the ones that find you in unexpected moments, in corner booths during storms, in parking lots during hostage crises, in converted firehouses that become home. They're the people who refuse to let you hide, who see you when you're trying to be invisible, who love you not despite your scars, but because of them. Because they understand that scars are just proof that you survived, that you kept going, that you were brave enough to heal. And as the years continued, as Grace went off to college and won awards and started her own company, as Ward's Auto Repair celebrated its 10th anniversary, and Hart Industries became a leader in corporate ethics and community protection, as Ethan and Amelia grew older together and built a legacy that would outlast them both, one truth remained constant. Love is protection. Love is showing up. Love is being brave enough to be seen and strong enough to be soft and wise enough to know that the best things in life are the ones you build together, piece by careful piece, with patience and faith and the absolute certainty that some things are worth the risk. The story that began in a diner during a storm didn't end with a wedding or a business success or any single moment of triumph. It continued, as all real stories do, in the accumulation of ordinary days transformed into extraordinary life by the simple act of showing up, doing the work, and loving fiercely despite the fear. And in the end, that's what mattered most. Not the heroic moments or the grand gestures, but the quiet, consistent choice to be present, to be brave, to be open to possibility, even when it terrified you. That's what made a life worth living. That's what made a family worth building. That's what made a love worth fighting for. And Ethan Ward, the mechanic who became a guardian, the warrior who became a protector, the broken man who became whole, understood that now. Not because someone told him, but because he'd lived it, day by day, moment by moment, choice by brave choice. The storm had passed. The morning had come. And the life waiting on the other side was more beautiful than anything he dared to imagine.